So we'll reconvene this meeting. I'd like to introduce Tara Welch. She is our new attorney assigned to the Veterinary Medical Board because I guess we're so good that we need two attorneys right now. And we're hoping Judy gets here pretty quick, but Kurt, I believe, has some comments.
I did, members of the audience, I did want to talk about 2035. The supervising veterinarian shall be responsible for determining the competency of the RVT permit holder. But
Can you tell us where you are in talking to the...
Sure. So I'm a little bit responding to something, a comment that Dr. Sullivan made about the level of supervision and the responsibility of the veterinarian. So coming from the medical board, this is captain of the ship doctrine a little bit. But I do want to point out that under 2035A, it would be a logical inconsistency for the perhaps negligence of one of the subordinates mentioned there, the RVT, the permit holder veterinary assistant, for that liability to be imputed to the veterinarian. If the veterinarian were to determine that here's one of those persons enumerated in 2035A were competent, but in fact, for whatever reason, showed up impaired by substance or whatever, it would be difficult, and this is just my theory, it'd be difficult to impute that liability onto the veterinarian, especially in a remote location, because how would the veterinarian know that there's substance abuse or whatever? So I just wanted to point that out. I don't know that liability would roll uphill to the veterinarian if he or she met the obligation to determine the competency. Any thoughts? Diane, do you have any thoughts on that? No? No thoughts, okay. I understand. That's the one good thought I had today, I think, so.
Oh, and Judy's here, so we are on to recommendation item number 8.
California licensed physical therapists with advanced certification in animal physical rehabilitation, with such certification to be defined by the Veterinary Medical Board and the Physical Therapy Board working cooperatively, may provide animal physical rehabilitation under the degree of supervision to be determined by the veterinarian who has established a veterinarian client-patient relationship on a veterinary premises or an animal physical rehabilitation premises as defined in regulation by the Veterinary Medical Board and the Physical Therapy Board working cooperatively, or a range setting. I do have some things I want to bring up with this one, obviously.
Okay, go ahead, Dr. Klingberg.
Thank you. Obviously, there's a lot of folks that haven't talked today, and I think they're here to speak to this one. Here at the VMB, you live in the world of statute and regulation, liability and responsibility, and there are some far-reaching implications of this particular language here. The Animal Rehab Task Force did acknowledge that physical therapists are trained practitioners in humans, but they have no education in animals. PTs cannot readily identify emerging problems in animal patients, and they have no training on how to provide emergency services to animals. It's not the PT's fault. After all, diagnosing problems and providing emergency treatment are within the scope of veterinary practice, not physical therapy. In order to achieve educational equivalency with the veterinarian, you must go to veterinary school. I think the VMB needs to remain consistent. We talked about today the conversation that we had at the MDC yesterday and that you had previously about reciprocity. And we voted not to allow veterinarians to get a certificate or use the certificate, their board certification, as a proxy for clinical experience. I really don't see how the board can vote that way regarding licensed veterinarians, yet allow PTs to get some sort of certificate in order to practice animal physical rehab, which is a component of veterinary medicine. Secondly, there is an issue of case control and liability. The notion of an APR premise is completely undefined, but let us assume that it has a supervising veterinarian as the managing licensee with a PT inside the building to perform animal physical rehab. So an animal is referred by a veterinarian who established the VCPR to this facility with a supervising DVM as the licensee. But the supervising veterinarian does not establish the VCPR, and the physical rehab is administered by the physical therapist. If the animal is harmed, which of these three individuals is at fault? Is it the supervising veterinarian, the referring veterinarian, or the physical therapist? Furthermore, if the referring veterinarian doesn't have a key to the facility where animal physical rehab is taking place, how can she or he be certain that quality control is what they want? And this is the act of practice of veterinary medicine. How will this sort of confusion regarding liability and responsibility help the consumer or the animal patient? Of course, I think that it will not. California currently has a working model for animal physical rehabilitation. The veterinarian establishes the VCPR and directs his or her team, whether it is an RVT, a veterinary assistant, or a physical therapist, to work on the animal patient. Importantly, the veterinarian chooses who does what based on that DVM's awareness of the team member's skill set. This all takes place under one roof, the same premise where the veterinarian established the VCPR. This model has worked for all facets of veterinary practice, whether it is chiropractic, acupuncture, or physical therapy. It protects the consumer and the patient.
Thank you.
And could I make it clear that that is Dr. Klingborg's opinion, that's not the official opinion from the task force?
No, that is my opinion as a vice chair of the task force, as chair of the MDC, who also lives in the same regulatory world that you live in. And I'm a veterinarian.
Chair Waterhouse? I would,
Yes, Lee Heller.
thank you. Like to point out two things. One, this motion was actually the motion that Dr. Klingborg made at the task force that he's now calling into question. And that was passed by a vote of 10 to 7, I believe?
10 to 7 to 1, I think.
Okay, thank you. The other is that one of the charges we were given as a task force was not to feel trapped by the existing regulatory framework, as poor Mr. Hepler said again and again and again and again, and that to be aware that, for example, if a new regulatory and licensing scheme were developed for new practitioners, in those locations could be vested liability. That the presumptions that you're making in your presentation assume that none of that happens, whereas the whole point of the task force recommendations is that the Veterinary Medical Board and the Physical Therapy Board work together to offer a new regulatory and licensing scheme which would identify the Veterinary Medical Board's competence to oversee practitioners rather than the referring veterinarian. Just as now, if you in general practice refer me to a specialist, you're not expected to inspect their premises and trust their competence as a specialist in veterinary medicine. This body is. So the presumption behind the recommendations is that this body would come up with a regulatory scheme to ensure that these practitioners, when referred to by the supervising veterinarian, with the level of supervision be determined by that veterinarian, would have a regulatory and relief framework created by this body.
Dr. Sullivan.
Yeah, the huge difference on referral is that the standard of practice right now is when I refer to another practitioner, general practice or specialist, that veterinarian assumes the VCPR or creates the VCPR. Under this scenario, as I understand it, I would be referring to a physical therapist to do animal physical rehab, and I would maintain the VCPR. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Within a certain period of time, whether it's 60 days or 90 days, from the letter I write to the physical therapist, the client goes there, the physical therapist begins the treatment, and as long as that person is giving me a letter once a month, that treatment can go on indefinitely. And at the entire time, I'm still the one with the VCPR. That does not make any sense to me whatsoever, legally, logistically, ethically. It is incomprehensible to me. I think as I look through this, and I think John said at the end of the meeting, the devil's in the details. And as I took the model that was given to us and started looking at the details, we've got to change at least 2, if not 3 different sections of statute, and we've got to change the I just don't know what's broken that we have to fix. And I appreciate the task force work, but what I heard on the task force was the ideal model is having all of this teamwork under one premises. I don't think the task force listened to that testimony, but especially in that last day, it came up person after person. And we don't have to do what the task force recommended. That's up to us. And we've got to be really cautious as we proceed because of unintended consequences when we start changing statutes. It's there.
Dr. Nunez.
The logic behind it was that it's supposed to be a team approach. It's the veterinarian that is making the diagnosis, the veterinarian that is prescribing the treatment. And in some situation, it is the physical therapist at another location that is doing the treatment. A lot of the concerns about what could go wrong with that process, we attempted to make provisions to ensure that this physical therapist is properly treated and that this site is properly supervised. That's the logic behind it. I certainly understand the concerns about the potential things that could go wrong, but I don't think it's completely an illogical prospect.
And
Kathy.
one other thing, Dr. Sullivan, I sort of got bogged down in the suggested framework of all the things that would need to be changed, because the devil is in the details. It's written very open-ended and things like that. But I realized that those were given to us, the 90 days, the things like that, by council as suggested placeholders, because I started going, no, what? No, blah, 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 because I was having the same problems. But I think what the task force is saying is this in general as a concept. Then when you go into the details, yeah, you're right. I assume, I hope, that they would all be under the board's purview. For the most part, I'm confused a little bit about the joint physical therapy board and vet med board dealing with the curricula and the certification, but I assume that's all details that have to be further resolved down the line, right?
Jennifer.
I watched all of the webcasts, I read all of the documents, and I had some concerns myself. I am a consumer as well as an RVT, and 3 dogs ago, was taking my dog to a holistic veterinarian who did chiropractics and acupuncture and laser. I had a situation where I was trying to get him into the truck and he fell. I had to call the vet. I'm going to be late. It never crossed my mind, should I continue with this alternative treatment or should I see my vet? Because they were the same person. I, as a consumer, am more comfortable knowing that my dog is getting care from a team. It was definitely mentioned it was a team approach. And as far as the physical therapists, the ones that were on the task force, they are the exception. They are amazing. Of course they're qualified, but I'm hesitant to make an exception for just those qualified individuals because this would encompass all PTs. And there's not yet a national accreditation for the canine rehab institution, and that gives me pause as well.
Dr. Sullivan.
Another example of getting bogged down in this is hospital inspections. So according to our statute, in order to have hospital inspections, I think are one of our primary consumer protection vehicles. And in order to have a hospital, we can only do hospital inspections on premises that have permits. And so are we going to give a physical therapist a premises permit? If we do, then it requires a licensing manager. So now are we going to have a licensing manager that's a physical therapist? If we do, I mean, these are totally independent, permitted facilities. If we do that, then I think the RVTs have justification to come back and say, why aren't we licensing managers? We have at least a license with your board. So again, I don't think the details were very well thought out, if at all. And I'm questioning. I keep on my notes saying, why are we making these changes? And I'm very concerned about the answer to that.
Chair Waterhouse.
Lee Heller.
It would maybe be really helpful if we just revert to the actual recommendation of the task force. I want to thank Mr. Hepler for trying to offer a draft model of what we might do if this recommendation is adopted, but I think it has confused people. This is not anything that the task force did. Again, thank you. You put a lot of work into it. I appreciate the effort.
What,
All that the task force did was what's the bottom of this page, which is unfortunately not numbered, but is at the third and final meeting, this motion was approved. So it's a conceptual motion that physical therapists with advanced certification, and only those, to address Ms. Loretto's concern, and those certifications or credentials to be determined by the Veterinary Medical Board and the Physical Therapy Board working together cooperatively. Only those may provide animal physical rehabilitation under the degree of supervision to be determined by the veterinarian who has established the VCPR. And I understand your concern about that, Dr. Sullivan. On a veterinary premises or an animal rehabilitation premises that would also then be defined and regulated by the board. So yes, this does open up new areas of licensure and regulation. There's no doubt about that. But I also just want to be really clear about what was actually recommended, because one of the other problems that I at least saw in public comment was a lot of misinformation about what was actually being recommended. So no one recommended that any physical therapist could practice animal physical rehabilitation in any setting without supervision or simply on a referral basis. And yes, there was a conceptual understanding that a new regulatory framework would have to go into place, but not at the level of detail that Kathy, for example, got distracted by, because that was not part of the task force recommendations.
Dr. Sullivan.
you still have, no matter how you frame it, I mean, I had these questions before we got the example. You still have to answer the question about how the VCPR works, and you still have to answer the question, how are we going to do hospital inspections, because there's two conditions in code, in statute, that have to be changed. And I think you have to change the definition of practicing veterinary medicine. And I think if you're changing 3 or 4 sections of statute, I think we may be heading the wrong direction on a policy for veterinary medicine. And again, I ask, why are we doing it? And I don't think that there's a justification for going down that road, because there's going to be more unintended consequences with that. One, for example, this is opening a door to a new permitting process. A door that once it's open, you're not going to be able to close it, and any professional medical group has access to that door. And it is eroding our control of the Veterinary Practice Act. If this is veterinary medicine, if what we are doing is veterinary medicine, the responsibility should be here, not divided between a couple of boards. That is not consumer protection. That is splitting, that's going to split up. You can see the scenario. The veterinarian's going to say, well, I haven't seen that case in 2.5 months. The physical therapist is going to say, yeah, but he's got the VCPR and he okayed the treatment. So now we've got 3 attorneys and 3 expert witnesses instead of 2 attorneys and 2 expert witnesses. We're complicating a picture that doesn't need to be complicated. I better shut up.
Jennifer.
I have a concern with the way that it's written, that the VMB would not have jurisdiction over the facility in which physical therapy or animal rehabilitation would be practiced. I had another point that I'm trying to remember, that this is a consumer protection agency, and it was mentioned in one of the task force meetings that the field of veterinary medicine needs to catch up to human medicine, but I feel that this is not a competition. This is about consumer protection, and if my grandmother were going to a facility, I would want to feel that she were informed and that her dog would be protected. And as written, I'm just not convinced that the language safeguards consumer protection, and I'm uncomfortable with the exact way that it's written. I don't really have a solution for it.
Kathy?
And coming from the consumer angle, the one thing that's different, and I appreciate that other states are doing it, I'm just, again, devil's in the details. I'm uncomfortable with its vagueness. I'd rather have it defined what the advanced certification is, because, et cetera, because at the end of the day, all the stakeholders were participating. The one that wasn't participating were the animals that have no voice, but at the end of the day are getting the treatment and I know we're all humans, but some humans aren't perfect, right? So I would like to err on the side of making sure, as a veterinary medical board, I always figure that we're responsible for two entities, the patient and the consumer. And I think that's a bigger reason, alternative, complementary therapies. I happen to have access to a number of vets that do all the different protocols. And I'm all for using everything possible to help a dog through an illness or a condition. And physical therapy is wonderful. But I definitely, as the licensing board, feel like the consumer needs to know who at the end of the day is holding the ball, and who at the end of the day is responsible if a vet, I see this leaves it in the hands, I guess, basically of the vet to refer in the first place. But I just would like to know that there's an accreditation, some sort of license or something that is embedded in all of this. And I assume, Kurt and Cheryl, that if we're voting for this concept as written this way, we can't add things as defined by the medical board or whatever, because that'll all happen under all the statute and regulatory things that will, I mean, everything Kurt said, we're gonna have to consider.
So
is-
we'll vote on the motion as written.
This is written.
As written.
No, wait.
And then,
Can we clarify, the only thing we're voting on is what the task force moved and passed?
Yes.
Not the
Yes.
next page?
Oh, I know.
Which is, okay.
yes. no.
But I'm saying we're voting on this as written right now. Okay.
Well,
And
we're
that's
not
why I
actually
have to
voting
read
on
it.
it because I think we're discussing it.
Yes,
with the-
discussing.
Right now we're discussing.
Talking about it, yeah.
Any other comments here?
We're not voting on it yet.
No.
We're gonna hear public comment.
Yes,
then we get
eventually
to-
we'll vote.
Then we get to talk
Always.
some more and then we vote.
Yeah,
Okay, good, thank you.
yes.
I guess I would have one last thing to say in regards to these, Dr. Klingborg looking for the keys to the premise that's performing physical therapy. You can find the keys at the Veterinary Medical Board and the Physical Therapy Board. Under this concept, they would have the keys. It's not necessary for a referring veterinarian to have the keys when they have the keys. I was a little ethereal, I hope you got it.
Okay, I'm totally confused about the keys.
I got it.
So at this time, we'll take public comment, but we do need to limit your comments to 3 minutes. And Anne Marie's going to keep time.
Just a moment, how many people want to speak
Oh,
on this
yes.
item? A lot. That's my mathematical background, okay. So what we'll do is we'll limit public comment to 3 minutes. Anne Marie will keep track. As we get down to the end, we'll kind of give you the high sign. We'll approach this a little bit like a regulatory meeting. If you want to say, I agree with the person, whatever they said in front of me, you can do that as well. And so we'll go from there. I would, is the board taking this, just so I understand, we're going to have public comment, and then when we get to a motion, or if we get to a motion, then we're going to have public comment on that motion as well? Is that where we're going, Training?
If there's something additional, we don't want to hear the same public comment
For-
again after the motion.
For clarification, would it help to make a motion on this, just so we then define the public comment around it, and don't have 2 rounds of public comment?
It's really up to the board. I just want to make sure that everybody's voice gets heard. So,
I mean, I can move that we adopt this recommendation for the purposes of then focusing public comment, so we don't have it twice.
I think that's a
But
good
I'd
idea.
also
Okay.
reserve the right for my own additional comment after public comment, with the chair's permission.
Okay,
Yes. So I will move that the board adopt the Animal Rehabilitation Task Force motion as written in front of us, but not Kurt's.
And
Cheryl, on the second page.
I will second your motion.
okay, we're not going to take any more discussion right now, right? Okay, call for the vote.
no.
Now we'll take.
Wishful thinking?
That's very efficient.
I'd love to do that.
Wishful thinking.
Okay, now we'll take public
Public
comment.
comment on the motion.
Can we do that?
And if you,
Diane
just for the
Sequoia.
record, in order so we have a complete record, if you wouldn't mind, you don't have to, just say your name.
Yeah,
so that we
Diane
have-
Sequoia. May I suggest perhaps if there are lots and lots of people who wish to speak, maybe cut the initial public comment to 2 minutes per person and fit more people in?
Hi, my name is Shalon Barr. I, as well as having been a member of the VMB task force, I hold multiple certifications in human and animal massage and bodywork and fitness training. I have a number of comments to make today. I think I'll fit it in under the 3 minutes. First of all, I want to address Dr. Sullivan's concerns, and I keep hearing this echoed throughout the board. The veterinarians, the veterinarians, the veterinarians. My practice, how is this going to work? And I said this a lot in the task force, and I'm going to repeat myself here. This isn't about the veterinarians. This board is about consumer protection, number 1, animals, number 2, and regulation of veterinarians and RVTs and vet techs, 3, 4, and 5. So you talking about vets and vet protections and how that's going to work for your practice and what a burden and onus it is to change the regulations is fine, but that's not the consumer's concern, and the consumer should be your main concern. As far as catching up to human medicine, it's not catching up, it's keeping up with science. I think that was the issue that was on the table at the time. Animal rehabilitation is fairly new. It's effective. Everybody's embracing it. I think the board needs to keep up with the science of that, and it needs to keep up with what works for the consumers. The other comments I want to make are about the task force. We worked very long and very hard to come up with the language that we did. We wanted to allow for a professional, diverse market, grant veterinarians control that they wanted over the marketplace and over the welfare of their patients. Sadly, some of the people who were on the task force, some of our associates on the task force have engaged in a campaign to malign the task force's work, and by misrepresenting and falsifying the product of our hours together. You actually have copies of those misrepresentations on your tables, and there's some in the back for public. Now, I believe in free speech, but misrepresentation, lying, falsifying what's already written is patently unethical, it's unfair, and it's unseemly. I believe in free speech. I believe in the right to say what you want and have your own opinion. This particular speech, the way this was done, the way it was presented to the public, is meant to deceive. That I find offensive as a consumer and as a practitioner. These comments were made particularly to sway the board, to exert influence over them by manipulating colleagues, associates, and worst of all, consumers. My concern is this, is that the responses generated by these documents and by the misrepresentation will be accepted as fact by the board and will inform their decision. But it shouldn't be, because opinions based on lack of information or incorrect information.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up.
All right, I'll just say that this isn't about a turf war. It's not about infringement on a vet tech's rights. It's not about the veterinarians. It's about what creates a good market and a safe market for consumers and their animals. I'm asking the board to uphold what Dr. Klingborg himself penned, which was a very fair and reasonable way to go about embracing animal physical therapy. And I think we've written in enough stopgaps where working with the board and working with the PT board, you can arrive at some safe and reasonable conclusion. Thank you.
Good afternoon. James Sims, California Physical Therapy Association. I first want to thank the hard work that Dr. Nunez and Dr. Klingborg has put together to get this task force. It was, and at times, seemed like herding cats, but yet cats that really didn't want to be together at times. So thank you guys very much for all the hard work we've done. From a logistics thing, there's a letter from the California Physical Therapy Association that I don't know was sent on the 9th of this month, and so I have a copy here. It's not back or included in the materials, so we'd like to have that entered in as we go from there. A couple clarifications in terms of one, first, Dr. Sullivan's comment about, what's it fixing? Healthcare is always changing in the human and in the animal world here. We're fortunate, and the lady here is fortunate that you have access. You wrote that you had, I happen to have access. Well, there are a lot of people who don't have access to rehabilitation activities for their animals. And to limit access to them because of a arbitrary restriction of use of qualified healthcare personnel does not serve the consumer of California well, which is the onus of this board is to protect the consumer. The Sunset Review Committee watched, and the Department of Consumer Affairs was present, and there's another member from DCA is here today, back in meeting in October, and at that time it was kind of, I've been working on this since 2006, and it was identified then by myself, and they concurred that this is going to probably require a statutory event to fix. And that doesn't mean you fix it all in one fell swoop. You know, they'll charge the board either unilaterally or working with another board to then promulgate regulations such that the consumer in California has good healthcare options for their animals. And it becomes that way for them. And so, you know, we need to stipulate that use of the two boards to work collaboratively. PT's already done that with the medical board and a certificate in EMG, and they've also done it in terms of the pharmacy board in terms of topical application stuff. So we'll go from there. But I just want to finish with that the task board, the task force was charged with a very broad scope of individuals to have input. And I really weight the comments from that task force, apparently enough that the Senate B&P committee asked for that to be formulated to bring these through. And so I'd really weigh the comments from the task force very heavily and a lot in terms of the decisions you guys are going to make here. The last comment in terms of the proof of the CPTA, physical therapist, recognizing that this is for consumer protection. There was a regulation one time promulgated or attempted to be promulgated or forward that would let all physical therapists, and so you know, all physical therapists are not qualified to do this, and this does not ask for all physical therapists to treat. It's those ones who have that specialized training. And so any kind of comment that says physical therapists don't get training in animal rehab, in entry-level education, I tested to that at the task force meeting. I'm finishing. I see you're grabbing the mic. I got my timer. And we noticed that. And so that's why there's some qualifiers in terms of what's going on there. So it's the appropriately trained person for safety for the consumer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Karen Atlas. I'm the president of the California Association of Animal Physical Therapists. I understand that possibility that a lot of the letters that were submitted didn't necessarily make it to your packets. So I do have a list of, or packets of these letters. A lot of the letters that were sent in were, as I understand, more template kind of letters. These are actually not template at all. These are all individualized letters by leading veterinarians, physical therapists, and consumers alike. So certainly due to the increased public demand for animal rehab services and concerns for protecting the consumer from unqualified practitioners is what motivated the board to create new regulations and/or legislation over the last 10 plus years. So I'm pleased that you recognized that the current regulatory language isn't suitable and needs to be reworked. So as a task force, we concluded that the veterinarian should remain in control of their veterinary patients. The veterinarian should and will have clear oversight of their cases. The task force felt that a veterinarian must first have the responsibility to examine a patient to determine whether the patient is safe and appropriate for rehab services. The veterinarian, therefore, would act essentially as the gatekeeper of the patients to ensure optimal safety throughout the duration of the treatment. The task force also came to the conclusion that the veterinarian should be the one to decide what level of supervision should be required for any given patient. So if, for example, a more critical patient needs PT, but would be better served and more safely served with a DVM on site, then that RDVM has the choice to mandate direct supervision. However, since the majority of the patients that need rehab services are not medically critical, then the RDVM can have the choice to refer to a qualified PT that may not have a veterinarian on site. Choice is important. Choice is a good thing. People want choice. So under the task force provision, not only does the veterinarian have choice on who and where to refer, but the consumers also have the choice as to what kind of practitioner they want to seek out. Of course, the consumer's responsibility is to vet that particular practitioner, just like we have to do in human medicine. So they need to be able to be keen on picking qualified practitioners And it's clear that in the other states like Colorado, consumers choose with the businesses that they frequent. So they're seeking out more and more rehab services, and since access is opened up to qualified PTs in that state, it has the most flourishing rehab industry in the nation. The task force also came to the conclusion that the current mandate of a vet premise permit should not serve as a barrier for animal rehab specialists to practice on their own premises in an indirect supervision model.
Ms. Atlas, can I ask you to close, please? Your 3 minutes is up.
Yes. Namely, the APR premise permit was offered as a solution by Dr. John Klingborg, who's of course, the chair of the MDAC, who you previously tasked to remedy this issue prior to the legislative mandate of the stakeholder task force. It was such a wonderful solution to have a different premise type to created to allow for qualified and licensed non-vet professionals to practice rehab, and it would ensure that no other practice of vet medicine would take place on these types of facilities where a vet may not be on the same premise.
Okay, Ms. Atlas, I have to ask you to close.
Okay. So to have this specific premise on record, either with the VMB or the PT, would also solve the issue of board oversight and allow for premise inspections furthering consumer protection. So I think that it does what it needs to do to keep the consumer safe and maintain choice for the veterinarian, keeps everything in the veterinarian's control, and allows for...
Ms. Atlas?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Will I be able to pass these out?
You can leave those with Ethan, and he will make sure they get distributed.
Okay. Well, the vote's going to happen then without anybody seeing.
I made a statement earlier that before we considered this item that Mr. Mathis was the point of contact, and that if anybody had anything to distribute, he would be the point of contact. Is that correct, Mr. Mathis? Yeah. So
Okay.
you can certainly give it to him now, and we'll
Okay.
distribute
Well, I
it.
asked Anne-Marie before the meeting, and she said to ask you guys if I could pass them out, and thought that I would be able to pass them out for you to consider, but I guess that is
No, we're
not the
gonna
case
consider
this
them.
time.
Janet Van Dyke, veterinarian and also a member of the task force. I want to applaud the group that met 3 times to go through all of this effort to create the documents that are in front of you. I've been practicing for 36 years, and my goal has always been to provide the best possible care for my veterinary patients. After 30 years of doing surgery, I realized that I was missing the PT piece, and started to really get very much involved in this industry. I think that one of the key things that I would recommend that the board look into is the success of what's happened in Colorado. I was involved in the process there, getting legislative change to happen that spells out specifically how physical therapists and veterinarians can practice together so that neither puts their patient in harm's way or harms their license. These 2 boards, the veterinary board and the PT board, worked together with the Veterinary Medical Association in attendance to hammer out the words that help them now have a very good working system. Should I wait?
No, go ahead. It's okay.
Thank you. So in Colorado, what has been spelled out and has been working very, very well since 2007 is a set of rules that we created such that in order for a physical therapist to work with animals, they must have a very clear education, and the rules and regs spell out in detail what those bits of education are and how many hours of each subject they must receive. The PT then must register with the board in the veterinary board in Colorado. So they then receive a license to practice as an animal practitioner. Then in order for them to treat an animal, the animal must have veterinary medical clearance, which means that a veterinarian has examined the animal, has their own relationship with the client, and has cleared that animal for physical rehabilitation and said that this is all right for this animal to be seen by a PT. The vet determines which PT they're going to send it to. They don't just say, whatever, good enough, any PT can treat this animal. Then the PT must maintain communication. They must get medical records exchanged to the veterinarian Q 48 hours. This is not a 30-day delay. This is not willy-nilly. This is done very, very thoroughly. And we have to date, since 2007, with a flourishing industry in Colorado, had 0 public complaints about any of the animals cared for by these physical therapists. We've had a really, really good flourishing industry for the veterinarians as a result. So I would recommend that you consider looking at what's happened in Colorado. I am happy to bring the players from Colorado here to work with you if that would be of interest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Susie Abe. I'm a firefighter in the city of Oakland. This is a picture of my dog for both sides. I would like to explain my opinion on this by reading the letter that I wrote to the board on asking you not to deregulate this, not to allow a PT who's not licensed to do it on a separate facility. So bear with me, it's about my dog. So I would like to express my position on the importance of my pet's safety while receiving veterinary care and/or rehab. I would like to do so using Gretchen, my first heart dog's case, to explain that position. In 2010, Gretchen was diagnosed with osteocarcinoma. She was such a sweet, regal soul who was so full of life and love. Sorry. I wanted to do more for her than what her veterinarian at that time could provide, so I sought out animal physical therapy and rehabilitation to reduce her pain and provide her as much comfort and quality of life as possible. Gretchen received a variety of treatment methods, including electrical stimulation, massage, and hydrotherapy. On November 30th, 2010, Gretchen collapsed while doing hydrotherapy. Being the protective dog mom and rescuer, I opened the door to the tank, releasing all the water into the treatment room to pick Gretchen's head up out of the water. At the same time, the registered veterinary technician rang the alarm. Before I could even get Gretchen out of the tank, a wonderful swarm of veterinarians and veterinary technicians picked her up and carried her into the hospital where they stabilized her. They had warm air flowing on her when they brought me back to see her. We took an x-ray and found that the cancer was systemic. I called my family and told them the situation and asked if they wanted to see her and be with us. Of course, they did just that. Excuse me. Gretchen kept lifting her head to look at us and to give us kisses before we let her go. Had Gretchen been receiving this care from a human physical therapist instead of a registered veterinary technician at a veterinary hospital and under the care of a veterinarian, Gretchen's story would have had a quite different outcome. She would have suffered greatly, as would I have watching her suffer. Instead, we were all able to give her a dignified passing with her family present getting to say goodbye. Please continue to provide for the safety and care of my pets by continuing to require direct veterinary oversight to assure their well-being when receiving any and all types of care, including physical therapy and rehabilitation. The California Veterinary Medical Board needs to continue providing for the absolute highest quality of care and supervision of our four-legged family members. Respectfully submitted. Sorry.
Thank you.
We thank you and our deepest condolences.
Hi, Judy Duff, dog owner, consumer, and I'd like to thank you all for this work. I had no idea how unbelievably tedious and difficult this kind of stuff is. This is not my bag.
Welcome to our world.
I mean, you talk about hurting cats, but, you know, you guys are hurting vets. I was so moved by what our firefighter just had to say. I don't know, frankly, how different it would have been if she was walking her dog and taking a hike across a creek or through a field, or if she was at home. I honestly don't know if it would have been different or not. All I know is when we brought our dog to a physical therapist, we had worked with any number of vets who tried to ease her pain, and she's an older dog and she can't handle a lot of medication. And this physical therapist had magic fingers and a wonderful heart and a great staff, and our dog just responded. And while we were there, because this is the first time I'd ever seen physical therapy for dogs, we were so moved. Dogs would come in who had been hit by a car, or who had back surgery, or who had birth defects, so they were trying to get it ready for one of those little carts. And it was just so heartwarming. You could see all of the animals recognizing each other who were in pain or in distress. But there was this sort of calm mellowness about them because they knew they were being helped. So my only point being is, as a consumer, I think it behooves us to increase our ability to access help for our pets. We got more and more people with more and more pets, and there's more need. And I think the licensing and certification process, the devil is in the details, I get it, but we need these people. They're very special, and it's just so helpful. So I know you'll do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill Grant, current MDC member. For those of you that know me, cutting me down to 3 minutes is somewhat of a challenge, but I will comply. I've cut my statements down from 5 pages to 3 pages to 2 pages and just standing there pretty much to a half a page. First of all, for the record, the MDC dealt with this issue for 4 meetings. Took over a half a year, and the board voted unanimously for direct supervision. This is sort of like Groundhog Day for me to sit here and watch the same process go again. I don't think, if I look at the main issues, what is it really? Number one, I've heard access. And I got to tell you, I am not sure that anybody in this room can tell me one way or another if this is an access problem. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. The other is consumer choice. When things work out well, you made the right choice. When things don't work out well, then you would have to ask yourself, or ask that consumer, did they want to have a PT working on their animal, or they have an animal that's harmed for not being in a veterinary hospital with veterinary care? Without getting into specifics, I will tell you right now, I have 3 animals in the last 2 months that are alive that came in for knee surgery that I had to deal with 2 of them. One I didn't even get to deal with because it had cancer, that are alive today because they came into our hospital on rechecks and had exams on rechecks. One had a splenic tumor. The other one had, within 4 weeks of us doing surgery, an arrhythmia or irregular heartbeat that certainly was fortunate that we picked up, but if it was at a physical therapist, would have never happened. This is my opinion, and it's a tough thing to say. But I truly believe that if this goes through, that this process is not, physical therapy is not performed in a veterinary facility. And I'm not talking about who does it. I'm just saying where it's performed. Animals are going to get harmed, and animals are going to get hurt, potentially to the point of death, as we just heard. This is tough. The vast majority of those animals will be fine, but there's going to be a small number. And I think all of these veterinarians in this room realize that. It may be a small number, but as far as I'm concerned, that's unacceptable. And for what? What's truly the point? Is it access? Is it freedom of choice? What are you guys making a decision on? If we get stuck in the minutia, it's a very difficult decision. So I would disagree a bit with the devil in the details. I think if you look at it as doing the right thing for an animal, I think it's a pretty clear choice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
My name is Vera Carba, and I'm from Southern California. And I just want to speak shortly about our little dog who went several years and many, many vets who didn't diagnose her. She could not get off the couch, onto bed, off the bed, and could do that very well prior to finally we took her to a vet that recommended a physical therapist. And our physical therapist had magical fingers, and consequently, she now can do all of those things, being 14 years old, that she couldn't do 3 years ago, and that several veterinarians, and with all due respect, we love our veterinarian, could not diagnose, even with them asking us to take a picture with our camera, and we did, of how she acted, how she hurt, how she winced, and even with that, there was no diagnosis. So the physical therapist would lay hands on her, and within 6 months, our doggie is fine. And so, you know, I don't see why we can't all work together with each other, and that there should be a problem with it, and that a joint board working with each other to come up with the rules should just be fine. And to me, everybody wins. The veterinarians win, the physical therapists win, and we win as consumers, and certainly our pets do. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. It's been a long 11 years, and I look up here right now and I don't see one face that was here when I started this process 11 years ago. So thank you all for being here for this, because it's important. My name is Erin Troy. I'm a veterinarian. I've been practicing for 24 years in general practice, and I've been practicing rehabilitation and sports medicine, pain management for 17 years. Throughout these last 11 years sorting through this, my position and priorities have never wavered. It has always been safety first and foremost for my patients. Not one person throughout this entire process has demonstrated that a veterinary patient is safer without a veterinarian on the premises. Not once. Over the last 10 years, I've submitted pictures, cases, letters from clients, long lists of concurrent diseases and concurrent medications to this board, showing what our APR patients come to us with, and demonstrating that many of these patients are fragile and their status will change while they're receiving care. This cannot be handled without a veterinarian on site. Our patients have their pain needing to be managed, their therapy protocols needed to be changed, they come with other medical issues, and if a veterinarian is not present, these will be ignored and they will not receive the full benefit from rehabilitation therapy. Without a DVM on site, cost of care to the patient, the pet owner will increase. If a client has to make a separate appointment, one for treatment with a physical therapist and one for treatment with their veterinarian to have their pain assessed, or their status assessed, or their medications changed, cost will go up. There's plenty of access. There's over 14,000, almost 14,000 veterinarians in this state, many of which would welcome to have a physical therapist work with them under the same roof to help their patients. There's over 11,000 RVTs that would welcome the same. On-site collaboration will not limit access, it will increase it. The last thing I'd like you to think about is this. I've heard it said that PTs feel they have a right to work on animal patients. My colleagues and I don't feel it's a right. We feel it's a privilege and a responsibility. We spend a lot of time. We spent 4 years in school. The current education process for the physical therapists outside of their very comprehensive human training is about 200 hours. The 2 for-profit schools that exist right now are not comprehensive enough, in my opinion, for me as a general practitioner to think that that physical therapist should have access to that patient without a veterinarian overseeing them. If you decide that you want to allow these physical therapists to do this, then please, I implore you, make sure that you raise the stakes on their training, because what they're getting now is not enough. And if you want to compare what's going on in another state, and always think it's successful. Remember, if we start doing that, we might as well start texting and driving without seatbelts or riding without our motorcycle helmets. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn Moon Carvda. We just want to recommend that with the APR recommendations, our recommendations would be for a veterinarian, they may delegate the performance of APR to a California licensed PT with board-approved certification in APR under direct or indirect supervision, except if under indirect supervision, a California licensed RVT who has also been determined competent by the veterinarian with the VCRP must be present. And this is very important because in many of these instances, these PTs are performing casts and splints on animal patients currently, which is not allowed under code, and we want to make sure that those patients remain safe and these appliances are applied appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Cynthia Wallace. I'm here from Sonoma County. And I'm a consumer. And I want to thank the board for taking on this huge, huge issue and the task force and the board for working so diligently toward some sort of a resolution. I'm a large and small pet owner, and I'm here today to request the board require a vet's active case management of animal care. As a consumer, I'm protected by this board, the veterinary medical training, and also have direct legal recourse, one stop for liability to the vet should incorrect treatments happen. Not multiple boards, not multi-state boards. Consumers will be misled and confused by a human-certified physical therapist being allowed to provide animal care without a vet's involvement. Consumers are a susceptible group. That's one of the reasons they have protections. That's why we have highly trained vets in California, high standards in California that ensure optimal care is offered to consumers and their pets. Proponents of the changes have claimed working under a vet's oversight is a cost issue for customers or for consumers. As a consumer, I can tell you cost is not the issue. Ignorance is. PTs do not have the medical training or understanding of other species necessary to provide many of the regenerative therapies. They need additional certified training. If you take an example of one of these therapies, PEMF, for healing. Claims were made at the task force level. The PTs know human tissue and bones, and they're not very different across species, so they're qualified to give animals these therapies, including PEMF. PTs do not learn differences in bone remodeling rates between humans and dogs. Bone turnover in dogs in research shows that they're between 16% to over 300% per year. People, 1% to 55%. Now take those differences into PEMF healing application and therapy planning, which is also desired to be done without vet oversight of the case or of premises. This introduces still more risks to the pet. Further, there are side effects to it, more common with the whole body treatment like the mats used with animals. It's not uncommon to have initial discomfort and nerve pain. Vet patients cannot self-assess. PTs are not trained in that. Pain assessment with animals. The Herx reaction is seen in PEMF, just like in acupuncture, deep tissue massage, antibiotics, and other therapies. Compounding PEMF effects, the antibiotic reaction is particularly apparent in patients being treated for lepto and Lyme disease, unfortunately more and more common in our pets today. These therapies are not trivial. They're not simple. If they were.
Ms. Wallace, can I ask you to wrap it up?
Yep. 3 minutes. If they were, today's required vet training would not be in place. Please do not allow erosion of consumer protections. Vets must have active case management. Therapy providers must have certified advanced animal training, at least as comprehensive as RVT in California or the equivalents currently in New York or Texas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just before I begin, I handed out something, actually Ethan handed out something earlier. I just want to see that you all have that and you can look at it because I was going to reference. It's the packet with all the pictures at the back. Jessica, or excuse me, Dr. Waldman, if you can just start your testimony, please. So in this packet that I handed out today, it includes position statement letters from me, from 4 other veterinarians that practice rehabilitation in the state of California, from one physical therapist who worked in my practice. The practice that I have is a practice that combines veterinarians and physical therapists, all with the certifications we've been describing, working collaboratively under the same roof. It's been in existence for 9 years, a wonderful model utilizing everyone's skill sets. One of the letters is from a physical therapist that worked in this practice with me and thinks that physical therapists are not qualified to be practicing without veterinarians on site. That's also in this packet. If you scroll to the second to last part, there's a chart, and that is a chart talking about veterinary pet insurance and whether or not they cover if veterinarians are directly supervising or not. And the vast majority of current insurance programs do not cover APR if a veterinarian is not directly supervising. Do you think the consumer knows that before they go to their referral practice, whoever they choose for rehab? 3 big issues we're talking about. These are not in priority. Number 1 is consumer protection, which also luckily is pet protection or patient protection for us. First of all, when a pet comes in for APR, the person who's going to treat them needs to be able to read the medical record. They need to be able to read x-rays, MRIs, and CT scans. That's what people get done these days in pets. Physical therapists are not trained in that in animals. They also will have concurrent medical issues, have medications with side effects. During the course of therapy, a pet will come in with an ear infection, a urinary tract infection. A pet will be limping more that day. And they will ask that rehab practitioner, can my pet go swimming today? It has a urinary tract infection. Is the PT qualified to answer those small questions? And a bigger picture concept, when there's an emergency, for which I've seen 100 at least at my clinic, where pets are bleeding into their abdomen, having a fainting episode from a heart issue, et cetera. PTs are, in their current programming, with the advanced certification we're discussing, are not taught temperature, pulse, respiration. They're not taught how to take those things, monitor them, troubleshoot, or triage. So this is a completely unfair onus to put on a physical therapist, who, by the way, is fantastic at helping us treat our veterinary patients. When we talk about access, which I do not think is the biggest issue, but it is an issue, there are now 62 vets certified in rehabilitation in this state, 20 physical therapists, 16 RVTs. There are 50 veterinary ophthalmologists in this state. Because there's only 50, meaning less than the number of vets, less than the number of PTs, less than the number of RVTs certified, are we now saying that we need to have access to human ophthalmologists because there's only 50?
Dr. Waldman, can you close your statements, please?
Yes. So my basic idea is simple. I love working with physical therapists. I think they're so important. If anyone believes in them and working with them, it's me. But it is not fair to the consumer, definitely not fair to the pet with cancer that's old, that has other problems, to ask a physical therapist to take on all those responsibilities and make good decisions for that pet.
Thank you.
Board, I'm Dr. Po-Yen Cho. I'm assistant professor at UC Davis, and I'll keep my talk short because most people has been out the points that I would like to talk about. But just respectfully ask the board to think about this matter in the bigger picture and think what is the practice of veterinary medicine. And we did agree on that the practice of animal physical rehabilitation is a practice of veterinary medicine. And we also understand there's a lot of other aspects of veterinary medicine that need improvement on. But we understand that physical rehabilitation is a part of the treatment method. It doesn't include everything. As a veterinarian, we learn to diagnose, assess the patient, formulate the treatment plan, assess the outcome, and prognose those patients. And rehabilitation by no way is close to that. So if we think it this way, and we agreed on animal rehabilitation is a practice of veterinary medicine, why should it be not under supervision of a veterinarian? That doesn't make sense at all. I would like to say that it's kind of dangerous to think about the idea of if it does work okay in other states, that it works okay here in California. We are a very unique state. We have 40 million people compared to 5 million people in Colorado. We have Reagan, we have Arnold Schwarzenegger, and we have Hollywood. We also want to consider science, and I do not disagree that there's a lot of science in human area about physical rehabilitation and the recovery of human patients after surgery. And to be quite honest, there's so far only one retrospective study looking at the improvement of animals after surgery for rehabilitation. So there's no real good hard evidence to prove animal physical rehabilitation actually help for patients, for our patients, which I hope someone could sponsor me for some research.
Yes.
But to think it that way, not only we want to increase the accessibility for the clients, but we also want to protect them from the treatments that are not necessary. Without the veterinary supervision, there's a good chance that human PT would just provide things that would work in human without hard evidence that would cause unnecessary money and waste of time for the patients and the clients. For availability, I really don't think having increased access, I really don't think the idea would actually increase the access, because most of the patients that couldn't have access to a physical therapist, especially in California, is because they live in a remote area. So you wouldn't expect the physical therapist down the road on your street to open up and become taking animal patients and give up the whole human part of business. So that's pretty much what I want to say, and thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Pomerantz. I'm from Marina del Rey in the Los Angeles area. And I'm here as a consumer, and I've been directly touched by the issues under consideration by the board, and I hope my personal experience might be helpful. My dog Laszlo suffered a death that was prolonged, painful, and gruesome. His internal illness went undiagnosed for many months. Experts that reviewed my case believe that he was suffering for months while under the care of a direct supervision rehab facility, as I understand that term. I watched nearly the entire task force hearings online with great interest and am grateful for the task force's hard work. And one day I'm going to look at that mural. That was beautiful. But there's an important point that I think was missing from the many thoughtful comments that I heard at the hearings. The notion that California consumers can't distinguish a physical therapist from a licensed veterinarian seems dubious to me. And in fact, I think the real risk of confusion lies in the direct supervision model and not the other way around. This is because there's a lack, or there seems to, in my opinion, there's a lack of clarity on the part of some rehab vets, and with due respect, the disciplinary arm of this board, as to whether a supervising veterinarian on site at a rehab clinic must accept responsibility for spotting and alerting a pet owner to signs of internal disease. When I asked the veterinarian who examined Laszlo multiple times over the course of months and prescribed rehab why she didn't advise me that he should be screened for cancer given his symptoms, she testified, open quote, "That's not my responsibility," close quote. And when I asked her whether she had any opinions, whether Laszlo had chronic GI disease while under the care of her clinic, she testified, open quote, "The symptoms may have reflected infiltrative disease, but he was under the care of a primary vet for that specific reason, not me," close quote. After I filed a disciplinary complaint against the rehab vet in question, I was saddened that this board's disciplinary body...
Hold on just a second. Mr. Pomerantz, I just want to... Is this issue still in play? Because as the board members, they don't participate in investigation or prosecution. And so there's a real concern. I'm not exactly sure what the issue is.
I can explain why it's relevant.
Okay, but I'm just saying, so if this were to proceed, and you contaminate everybody going forward, because this may be assuming facts not in any disciplinary case that's brought, So
Well-
if you have a concern about your case, it wasn't handled properly, it's not fully resolved, we have the enforcement chief of the board here, and we can talk offline.
I think it's been resolved, and I circulated, well, I'm only going to describe what I circulated and nothing more.
Okay,
The board, this is what the board said about an on-site supervising veterinarian at a rehab clinic. The medical records did not indicate that the rehab vet was requested to assume primary care or intervene in the other issues that were going on with Laszlo. The board also found that under the circumstances, there is a reason to assume that Laszlo's other health concerns were being managed by his primary veterinarian. These findings by the board, and I understand no one here is responsible for these findings, that's not what I'm suggesting, but these findings seem to me directly at odds with the alleged purpose of direct supervision. It can't be both ways. Either rehab vets directly supervising are responsible or they are not. And I heard one task force member speak at the last meeting who said that it's important having, open quote, a veterinary licensee managing a case, responsible for a case, liable for a case. But when push comes to shove, it seems that some rehab vets might not accept this responsibility, and this board might be reticent to impose this responsibility on them. And I saw the hard work of the task force at all the hearings. I believe that their recommendations were well thought out. They listened to all sides, and I think that there is confusion. I think the real confusion is in the direct supervision model. I think physical therapy should be separate, and I listened to that very sensitive woman talk about her dog, and I felt for her. And what I wondered was how long did that dog have cancer, and how long was that dog in rehab, and were there licensed veterinarians thinking about what else was going on with this dog?
I'm going to ask you to close your remarks now.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello again. Stephen Santal, and I am making a statement on behalf of the National Association of Veterinary Technicians of America. We sent you a letter on April 7th, so I hope you have that in your packet. If not, after watching the bias makeup of the APR committee and with the current recommendation as written, the National Association of Veterinary Technicians hereby asserts the following position. The role of the state or the Veterinary Medical Board is to protect the animals and the public of the state in which they govern. To that end, it is the belief of NAVTA that only licensed veterinarians and registered veterinary technicians possess the knowledge and training to plan and supervise APR for veterinary patients. Therefore, we highly recommend a veterinarian or RVT must be present to ensure proper animal handling, to recognize pain and discomfort, and to provide emergency care and assistance as needed in the particular field of APR. Physical therapists may seek further training to allow them to perform APR in veterinary patients, but only under supervision by a credentialed veterinary professional to ensure patient safety. Furthermore, having the College of Sports Medicine and the newly approved Academy of Physical Rehabilitation Veterinary Technicians an accredited and AVMA recognized advanced certification for animal physical rehabilitation for credentialed veterinary technicians on more than just one species. Imagine that. Now reduces the need for PTs to suggest a dramatic change to the Veterinary Practice Act that undermines the licenses and veterinary profession as a whole. I would also like to suggest, not as a NAVTA recommendation, that the VMB please discourage opposition opponents to refrain from walking a fine line of defamation on social media and other outlets. All of our hearts are in the right place in this matter, but the precedent set with this regulation recommendation can dramatically and negatively affect the ever-evolving practice of veterinary medicine by those holding veterinary license to do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Afternoon, Kristen Hegler. I'm going to try and not go over what everybody else has said. I agree with quite a bit of it. I'm going to start with the why. In one of our task force meetings, one of the members was asked why we are doing this, and it was stated that it's progress to allow the physical therapist indirect access to our veterinary patients. I disagree. I think progress should be looked at
the College of Sports Medicine, the Academy of Rehabilitation Veterinary Technicians. There's a recognizable need. We have recognized that in our profession. We've moved forward, we've done these things. And every single specialty in our veterinary world has started with humans. We have learned from specialists in humans, anesthesiologists, orthopedic specialists, I mean, you name it. So we now have the tools. They gave us the tools to, lack of a better term, fly a little birdie. We're doing great. Good job. But we continue to still work with these people. And the collaboration is great. But we shouldn't be treating APR any differently from any other specialty who we first learned from our human counterparts. Now I'm going to talk about this brace that I brought and the RVT license. This is a prescription. This is made for a patient with an ACL tear. Under the veterinarian's direct supervision, I made this cast. Albeit it is temporary, it's a skill that the medical board has extended to the RVT. This is a brace, it's a device. Now this is special and custom, however, things like thermoplastic splinting, are we going to start picking and choosing which duties are going to be done in an APR premise? Because I think that's very, very difficult to do, to start picking and choosing which ones we're going to allow the consumer access to and the ones not only infringing on the RVT duties. Access, people have stated it before, there's not that many physical therapists trained in APR right now. There's less than 20. There's plenty of veterinarian access for that. Safety, that's a big thing. Why are we allowing the dismissal of evidence in our task force meetings that animal patients have emergency conditions that are not present at the time of a veterinary medical clearance? Ask any university across the country. They have emergencies. It is real, and we need to take it very seriously. It is not histrionics. Please be proactive in this. Don't let the death of the patient happen. I do support the dynamic and collaborative work environment with the PT.
Ms. Hagler, I'm going to ask you to close your remarks.
Thank you. I urge you to consider having an RVT on site when the APR services are performed under indirect supervision, and that a veterinarian with a valid VCPR is liable for that animal's care. Please don't ignore the letters from the College of Sports Medicine, the Academy of Rehabilitation Veterinary Technicians, NAVTA, CARVTA, the CVMA, and other major stakeholders who are not invited to the task force to provide APR credentialing. They've sent in their statements. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name's Jay Kerr. I'm a veterinarian here in the East Bay, and I'll be brief. I just want to go back to something the very first public speaker said, and that is that the role of this board is to protect consumers and animals, and I couldn't agree more. But I would categorically disagree with her premise that consumers are going to be better protected by this last resolution that's under consideration. In this concept of referral without supervision, to me, is definitely a disservice to consumers. And I say that, I'm not going to repeat a lot of the things that have been said already, but without veterinary supervision, I believe it's just a matter of time before an animal's harmed. And a consumer is going to end up in front of this board. And the board has authorized unlicensed, unsupervised care. I just don't see that the consumer is going to have much recourse. So I'll just end by saying I just think it's a bad policy and sets a very bad precedent. Thank you.
Thank you.
I understand I'm coming up to speak in front of you again, but I didn't realize it was a procedural suggestion about the 2-minute thing, so I hope you'll grant me the chance to say what I wanted to say. Diane Sequoia, I'll be very brief. The proposed change is not consistent with the DCA's mission statement of consumer protection, nor with the MBA's mission statement of protecting consumers and animals, and maintain the maintenance of professional standards. Consumers and their animals will not be protected or well served by this change. The proposed change would have human physical therapists vet with advanced credentials in terms of treating cases of animal musculoskeletal disease rather than veterinarians knowledgeable about the whole animal, globally assessing the entire animal patient which happens to be suffering from a musculoskeletal disease possibly with other diseases. So the difference between being treated as a case and being treated as a patient with a problem is immense. I speak from personal experience, both for my animals and for myself. So I urge you to consider living up to the mission statement of both the Department of Consumer Affairs and the VMB, continue to protect consumers and their animals, and hold up the quality of veterinary care in California. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Ken Pulowski, the president of the California Veterinary Medical Association. Thank you for taking all this time, so many months or years, to consider this important topic. First off, nothing is stopping physical therapists from working on animals. They can work within a hospital setting or veterinary premises. So access is not an issue. There are plenty of veterinary hospitals that they can come and work in. And if a patient has a non-related complication at one of these to be determined APR premises, who has that liability? We can't transfer the VCPR. The veterinarian has that VCPR. Therefore, they would ultimately likely be found liable. So this does muddy that liability, the waters of liability there. Physical therapists are trained, as are all other human health practitioners in one species. Yes, there is a lot of crossover between animals, mammals that veterinarians work on, and humans. So were this to go through, what's to stop a veterinary or a human ophthalmologist from completing 120 to 150 hours of training and saying, I feel I should be able to work on animals because an eye is an eye, or a dentist because a tooth is a tooth. So, and physical therapists are predominantly claiming they're working on 2 species. But veterinary medicine encompasses dozens, hundreds of species of animals. So what happens when somebody brings in a rabbit and they have no experience with a rabbit? Are they going to try that? Who knows what's going to happen with the damage there? But were I to take a course, a 2-week course, and get 120, 150 hours of training, would any of you let me perform medicine on you and perform medicine on you? That's what this is the equivalent of.
Thank you.
Hi, Elisa Dowd. I'm a veterinarian in Danville. I have had patients I've referred for physical therapy under veterinary supervision. I've been very happy with the outcome. I know that the task force put a lot of hours of blood, sweat, and tears into reviewing this whole issue, and I appreciate that. But sometimes when we make an effort to review something, we somehow get the idea we have to make a change. We don't always have to. I think the model we have works just fine, and I agree with what Dr. Troy and some of the other representatives have said. A veterinarian needs to supervise these patients while they're getting physical therapy.
Thank you. Okay. Any more comments from the board? Lee Heller?
Thank you. Sorry. So as a general rule, I refrain from sort of personal narrative in my comments because, lots of other stuff happens. I've been involved in the issue of access to animal physical rehabilitation long before any of this was a matter in front of the board. When my first dog got a TPLO in 2003, and this was my first experience of a torn ACL, and there was nothing available at that time. I remember buying her like a little float device so she could go in my hot tub because there was nothing available in the way of physical therapy services for animals in Central California or Santa Barbara. Over time, services arrived, and when I got a dog with pretty significant orthopedic injuries in 2008 and took him to a supervised RVT in a specialty practice, she had minimal skills and resources. When finally I had the opportunity to bring him to a physical therapist with advanced certification in human medicine as well as advanced training in animal care, the difference was night and day. And as I was able to see in his case and in the case of the many other dogs that I brought to this person, the difference between that model and a highly trained physical therapist with additional certification. When I myself needed human physical therapy for a frozen shoulder, and I wasn't getting very good physical therapy from a human physical therapist, I realized my dog was getting better physical therapy and changed physical therapists to find one that was using the modalities that were being used on the current dog. And I'm proud to say I got my frozen shoulder unfrozen. So the reason I tell you this story is to return to what Ms. Duff, who was one of the earlier speakers, said. There is a level of training and expertise in physical therapy that is unique to that field. And I think we have a tendency to treat it in the veterinary world as if it's not that. In human medicine, physical therapists are an autonomous practice, and they are their own specialty with advanced training. Nobody is suggesting that someone with simple human physical therapy training be simply allowed to practice on animals. In fact, many of us who got involved in this issue are concerned precisely because practitioners are not getting enough training, whether physical therapists or veterinarians, in physical therapy. So the recommendation that the task force put forward was to recognize the special training and skill set of physical therapists with additional training and certification to provide something that really no other practitioner has. I had an RVT for a roommate who couldn't do anything for these dogs after their TPLO. Her surgical boss had no skills in vet rehab. So you say there's access, but the reality is unless you live in San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, or those nearby areas, there is no access unless a veterinarian decides to hire a physical therapist at the pay rate of an unlicensed veterinary assistant. So imagine you have a PhD in physical therapy, you've done all this additional training. If you're out in the human world, you can bill $200 an hour, you're working for a vet at $25 an hour. How is there incentive in the market for highly trained professionals to provide access? So as a consumer, what the DCA is supposed to be doing for me, and I'm a public member of this board, so my job is to advocate for consumers, is to provide safety and safe access. So if the market is constrained because a qualified practitioner can only provide their services in a limited environment, that limits my access. So here I am in Santa Barbara, maybe I'm in San Luis Obispo, maybe I'm in Carmel. There is no big city for me to get access to a veterinary rehabilitation facility like Dr. Waldman's. But maybe a practitioner, and I won't go on forever, Dr. Sullivan, a practitioner who wants to operate under the parameters of the recommendations of this task force can open a practice and get indirect supervision, referral, and oversight from veterinarians in the community because that's a market manageable model that still provides a level of safety. So I want to also address the issue of the misrepresentation that's been put out there that has got a lot of members of the public sending us emails and letters and speaking today. The task force never suggested that there was a physical therapist's right to do this. I've never heard a physical therapist make this claim. The task force has never recommended that there be no supervision or licensing, or that there be referral without supervision to unlicensed individuals. The advanced certification would provide the additional knowledge. That's what we're calling for in our task force recommendation. I will say, in echoing what Shala Bar said, it was really disappointed to put all of this work into the task force and then have so many people be misinformed by what the CVMA put out in its newsletter and by what one of the task force members put out in an email about what we actually are recommending. It's an insult to the people who spent 6 days of their lives working together. So I want to reassure this community that these recommendations reflect the best sense of access to safe, highly qualified practice. And that's what motivated me to get involved in this issue. So that's what I'm pushing for today.
Jennifer.
So first off, I know that the task force and everybody here put a lot of work, put a lot of thought into this. And I understand what Lee's saying about the access. When I was seeing my holistic veterinarian, after being made fun of by my vet, I drove 45 minutes to a vet that I trusted who provided this type of treatment. So I completely understand the access issue. And again, not trying to discredit the work that the task force did, but it was mentioned in the comments today, and it was a concern I had. I'm concerned that making this type of a change would be approving unlicensed activity, which I think is dangerous for the board. And with the fact that there's not yet a national accreditation, nationally approved accreditation for physical therapists working on dogs. I think that there could be a collaboration between the veterinary board and the PT board at some point so that in the future, PTs would be able to practice on animals under indirect supervision, but I don't feel that we're there yet. That's just my opinion.
Judy.
Okay, I'm a public member as well, and have had, I think I counted the other day, 28 cats, you know, in my lifetime. Most are deceased. I have 10 cats right now and 2 dogs. I've spent tens of thousands of dollars at veterinary offices in just a few years' time, maybe 1 year on some occasions. So, and I'm all about the animals. All I do every day of my life is work for the animals, passing legislation, cleaning up poop, changing litter boxes, you name it. So, yeah, the poop especially. So
We're laughing because you're combining passing legislation, cleaning.
yeah, I know.
up, so-
It's all the
Sorry.
same, all the same. So anyway, this is, to me, not about protecting anyone's job. It's not about expanding anyone's job. It's about making sure that there is care for my animal, the best care that he or she could possibly get. Now, if that is a PT who knows about human stuff, taking additional classes to understand an animal's body and whatnot, okay, if that presents itself as an avenue, and Lee says that that has worked for her and many others. If it's an RVT who's been trained by a doctor, by a DVM, by this extra training, I think that's okay too. If it's a vet who knows what they're doing with this PT and they do it, that's great. I am wary of a vet not being on the premise because getting back to these emergencies and whatnot, I've been on the board for 7 years. I have voted on this before. And I've heard umpteen million hours of testimony. And again, it is all about the animal. And if there is a meltdown of some type, I want there to be help right then and there. But to the gentleman that came from Marina Del Rey, I think I understand his point of the finger pointing, okay? And being on, and I think that was your point, right? That
the rehab that pointed to the primary.
exactly, this thing.
And the board supported that.
Right, and seeing all the years of cases, disciplinary cases, and I'm trying to think, to Dick's point, you know, the vet is, the buck stops with the vet. When we see disciplinary cases, it's on the veterinarian, it's on a premise. The only cases I've ever seen in 7 years on an RVT, and I might be wrong, but it's DUI, it's drugs, and it's DUIs and it's drug diversion. But it's not that they did something wrong to that animal, right? So I'm very worried for the point that he made that it is going to be this finger pointing thing and that we won't be able to address exactly who is the right licensee that needs to be disciplined and for them to be rehabilitated so that we can trust them, the consumers can trust them. And to Jennifer's point about the unlicensed activity, it is, right? And we need to address that. And the legislature wants us to address it. And it is a statutory, it's going to become a statutory thing. So we need to deal with it. And we need to deal with it now. And so I think that we deal with it we got to get these people some kind of permit that they can operate. And I'm sorry, Lee, but I think they do need supervision because they are not a veterinarian, just as an RVT does, you know? And we got to get it done, and we got to get it done now.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Sullivan.
I think we do need to address the access, and I'm going to quote Dr. Klingborg from the testimony at the task force. I think he quoted that there were somewhere around 34 to 35 veterinary ophthalmologists in the state, around the same number of cardiologists and the same number of neurologists. And he had researched 94 animal physical therapy clinics that provide this service. Personal experience, there's 2 just opening up within 2 miles of our practice right now. So I think one frame of reference we need to do here is recognize that we're writing statutes for the next 15 to 20 years in a area where veterinary medicine is filling it in quite rapidly. We're not writing regulations to satisfy what's gone on for the last 8 to 10 years. And I think, again, I'm going to go back. This is, if it is the practice of veterinary medicine, it needs to be handled by this board, and it is our responsibility then to dictate what that supervision is and go forward. It's not access.
So while we're each making special comments, I have one that, personal story. So there's a licensed physical therapist who's in veterinary school. And he was certified in APR, and he was working at one of these facilities where the veterinarians and the physical therapists work together. And so anyway, I hear about him, and he's in veterinary school, so I call him up. And I said, "Why did you go to veterinary school?" And his answer was, "Because I knew I didn't know enough about dogs." I knew I didn't know enough about dogs. So, yes, Kathy.
Oops. And now for the other public member. I've been grappling with this, and I watched everything like everyone did, and I've read every one of the what's come in, the materials. And as a really conscientious animal guardian of multi-species, I'm really trying to figure out a path to accommodating some of these things. Some of the access questions, some of the new choices in therapies, et cetera, et cetera. The problem I get to, and what I'm not comfortable with, is the open-ended wording of this thing, because if we're going to really allow off-site treatment by human-trained humans who have an additional training on an animal certification, which is yet to be defined, I really think, that maybe we should be talking about species-specific, things like that. The species are so different. The anatomies are similar, maybe, to humans, but their pain signals, even within breeds of dogs, different breeds respond differently. So, and show pain and stress differently. So it just seems for the ultimate good for the consumer and the animals, we really need to be careful about narrowing down if something's going to go off a veterinarian premises. And, are certain cases, is it only specific species? How soon or how recent did the vet see the dog? Because changes, I agree with everybody on both sides' comments, frankly. But I also understand that things happen unexpectedly, and especially in a lot of older dogs that are geriatric and do need physical therapy and can get a lot out of it, they have other things that creep up, and they creep up quickly. I know from experience with osteosarcoma and a number of other things. So I just feel like if we were going to move something forward, this language is
So we have a
very
motion, so first reading.
Yeah, no, I know. But I mean, I'm not comfortable with this language as it is. I know the task force considered all these things, and this is what the agreed to agreement was. But it just worries me because animals are, at the end of the day, are totally different than human beings.
And we are here to advocate for all the animals.
Yeah,
That's where
that's
I'm
my
coming from.
point.
here. I'm here to speak for them. Yes.
May I just want to respond to something Judy said? Judy, definitely your concern about emergent situations in physical therapy environments makes a lot of sense. The idea behind the task force recommendation that the veterinarian determine the level of supervision is for the veterinarian to distinguish which animals need to be treated in a veterinary environment for safety and which ones would be safe in an off-site location with constant feedback between the supervising veterinarian and the physical therapist. And my experience has been with these dozens and dozens of orthopedic cases that I have fostered, including some of my own, but many fosters, is these are animals who have been certified in good health by a veterinarian, but have a specific physical therapy need. And they're not emergent or going to be emergent unless something truly freakish happens.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that can happen if you send a dog to the groomer, if the dog is at the doggy daycare, right? There can be a sort of a medical situation and there won't be a vet on site. The logic is for the veterinarian to make the determination about which animals need to be provided physical therapy or animal rehabilitation therapy in a veterinary setting and which ones are safe to be done in a different setting.
Well, maybe when there's a permit and proper training, we could get to a place that
That's what we were
could
recommending.
establish that. So maybe to Dick's point, that we're writing this for the future, for now and the future, and not the past.
But Judy, the recommendation was that the
All
veterinary
right, well,
board
then
start
I
to
guess
develop
I could
that.
vote for that if that's the case.
That's what the recommendation is that the vet med board and the PT board sit down together and develop that, not just simply give the thumbs up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
No,
So we have a motion and a second. And so the motion is to
adopt the recommendation.
Adopt the last recommendation.
As written.
As written.
Okay.
There have been no amendments offered.
Okay, so can we go over it again, word for word then, on what the meaning is behind it all before I cast my vote? So I'd like to read it and put in layman's terms what I think it means. Do you mind, President Waterhouse?
So it reads, California licensed physical therapist with advanced certification in animal physical rehabilitation, in parentheses, with such certification to be defined by the Veterinary Medical Board. And
So
Physical
that's the
Therapy Board
certification
working
to
cooperatively.
come, this new thing. I just want to make sure that
There is no accredited school at this point in time.
Right.
There are 3 for-profit companies.
Okay,
One's really tiny.
Okay.
And so there's basically 2.
Okay.
One of those companies recommends that supervision be under direct only.
Okay.
Be under direct supervision of veterinarian only. The last for-profit company is Dr. Van Dyke's. And they have 120 hours, most of which is online. Right.
But that's,
And I'm
the
going
task
into a
force
lot
has
of-
not specifically made recommendations
Okay.
about those
What's
companies.
available right
so
now.
we could come up with something that actually doesn't even exist today.
Correct.
Okay,
It
thank
doesn't
you.
exist.
I just
Yeah,
want to
there's nothing
understand what I'm
exists right
voting
now
on.
that's
Thank you.
accredited.
Kathy's got her hand up. Okay.
No, I was going to say, yes, we can, and actually, or the legislature can, or somebody can.
Right, okay.
The
keep
task
going.
force did not specify what the credentialing requirements would be, just that they be developed by the vet med board in
Okay.
collaboration with the PT board.
All right, thank you.
To go on, may provide animal physical rehabilitation under the degree of supervision to be determined by the veterinarian who has established a veterinarian-client-patient relationship on a veterinary premises or an animal physical rehabilitation premises as defined in regulation by the Veterinary Medical Board and the Physical Therapy Board working cooperatively or a range setting.
And a range setting means out in the field somehow?
Yes.
A
on
horse
a
and
large animal,
somewhere?
horse, yes.
And this premise thing is something to be determined by us, and who knows when and how it'll exist after there's some credentialing.
As part of, I think, Judy, the understanding of the task force was that those would be developed together in order to come back with a proposal to the board that would provide a licensing mechanism with qualifications for both who practices and under what circumstances and in what premises and with what licensing.
And the vet calls the shots all the time on whether they ever use this person or use that facility.
Correct.
Okay, that seems pretty fair.
You ready to call for a vote?
Call for the vote.
Okay. Dr. Waterhouse?
No.
Dr. Sullivan?
No.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Dr. Noland?
No.
Jennifer Laredo?
No.
Kathy Bowler?
I would want to amend it, so as is, I can't vote for it, so I say no.
Lee Heller?
Yes.
Judy Mancuso?
Yes.
4 noes, 3 yeses, so the motion does not pass. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, 5 noes, 3 yeses. My math is never good.
That's probably right.
Rewrite or what here?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
I think we're finished with I would say we're finished with our job dealing with the recommendations from the task force. We've been working on this for 8 years. I think it's time that we take the responsibility of writing, recommending, I would call them regulations, but the staff and legal would have to determine if it's best put in regulation or if it needs to be put in statute. But I think we need to address this today. There's no reason to wait. We've had years of testimony, and let's start by putting some motions out there and see where they go.
So do you have a motion, Dr. Sullivan?
I think Lee has a question.
Do you have a
I
question?
think as a procedural matter, if it's not agendized, we can't move and adopt anything. We can certainly make recommendations for what either the MDC or the board going forward would look at, but we can't sort of write anything on the fly and then vote on it because it wouldn't have been out for public comment.
We're talking about animal rehab.
Yeah, but there was a specific set of materials that we were asked to vote on. If new material is put out there and it hasn't been available for public review, then that's a violation of the Open Meeting Act. I would also suggest that before we talk about doing something at the regulatory level, I think I want to remind you about the DCA coming in last time the Vet Med Board tried to manage this simply at the regulatory level and was specifically instructed that that wasn't going to work. So it might be that we have to come back with statutory recommendations, but I think thinking that we can fix this at the regulatory level is something we've already been told
I think
doesn't work.
I have a recommendation. What if we go, that we have some sample language here? Why couldn't we just move to start looking at this and making comments on it?
First, we need to get a legal question.
It's in our
We have a legal
pamphlet, so
question
it's
here.
definitely agendized.
Right, so I'm not exactly sure what we would accomplish by regulation. In all candor, you can direct staff, the board can direct staff to do something, and we can bring it back at the next meeting if that's what because that's not really a policy thing. You're just directing staff to go somewhere. But I would have to echo what Ms. Heller said, is that it has been my advice, and I think it's been Ms. Welch's advice for a short time, that this type of revision, if it would require some statutory manipulation as well. So we are not adverse to following the board's direction. I do have a bit of a concern about, because the way this was agendized would be, theoretically, the intent was we'd be reviewing what the task force brought, and then where do you want to go from it. So essentially, Dr. Sullivan is exactly correct. I think we've dispensed with what the task force said. It's like we went, I'm not very good, despite my love for baseball, we went 6 for 8 with runners with regulations and scoring position or whatever, but we did not adopt everything. So if the board wants to revisit this issue about what they can do regulatorily, we can put that on the next agenda. Again, for those of you that were here, the ancillary document that I produced was merely for consideration, and it was for consideration in the hope that when we got to the last item, you would know exactly what, when you made that kind of thing, the members would know and the public would know. That's kind of how the licensing scheme works. However, that was not adopted. So respectfully, I'm not sure where we can go from here. You can direct staff, like your council, to bring you back something, but I'm really reluctant to believe that we're going to vote on some other regulatory or statutory endeavor that's really not within the four corners of what the task force, or at least related to the task force, because it sounds like we'd be coming up with something new that perhaps is not within the four corners.
Not
of the law.
necessarily.
Dr. Sullivan.
Well, I kind of question that it isn't in the regulatory scheme. If we look at 2038, which is musculoskeletal manipulation, all of that definition is in regulation. So there, it is, if we say it is the practice of veterinary medicine in statute, then I think we do have the regulatory authority to define animal physical rehab and the criteria and the conditions under which it can be practiced. I think we tried years ago to use that as a model, and it got shot down for other reasons. But I think it's under our purview to describe the regulatory conditions that you can do animal physical rehab.
I would suggest doing that at another meeting, though, because the agenda itself does not have any kind of description that the board itself is going to take other regulatory action. It's just about the recommendations from the task force, and then it's possibly discussing concepts for legislation. So if you want to further discuss reg changes in a different way, we would probably have to do that at another meeting.
Judy.
Okay, so we went through the other 7 and we tweaked them and we discussed them. Why can't we just tweak number 8, for goodness sakes? There's no way after all these years and all this testimony and all this thought, we can't come up with something right now? For goodness sakes, the people who said no, why did you say no? And what is your specific problem in this paragraph? Let's talk about it. Strike it out. Move on.
We're told we can't.
No, I don't think that's true. We did it with the other items.
No, let me be clear. If we want to take another, if there would be an amendment, like I said, to this section, someone would propose a revision of this, I believe the board can vote on it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
Now,
it's up to the
hang
folks
on.
that voted no that should offer up something here.
Exactly, but that wasn't the question that was asked of council.
Understood.
The question that was asked of council was, could we do this regulatorily? and
Right,
could we
that
vote
was
on it?
different. Right.
And that's a different matter
Understood.
entirely.
Totally understand. Thank you. I just wanted to try to bring it back to what is before us and what we can do.
So if there's a motion to say, we want to substitute or we want to amend this, and there's a second, and then the board can talk about that, we can solicit public comment, and then the board can vote on it.
working on it.
So-
I'd like to make a motion to amend number 8.
Okay.
Well, Jamie's working on it, and she's going to be my second.
Could you be a little more specific about what amendment you are proposing?
Well, I mean, if I have to be clairvoyant here, since I wasn't one of the no's, but I have a feeling what the no's were going for, it's probably striking this last sentence about the alternative premise.
So, if I may be so bold.
Thank you.
But I would like to preface this, though, with a genuine thank you to the task force, to the people that are here in this room, and a genuine plea that we do try to come to some common ground. It's really impressive, all the work that's been done, and I'm just very grateful that there are so many people that have the willingness to really put in the time and effort. Okay, enough said. I will propose one. I don't know how successful it will be, but I would be very comfortable with this wording. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
California licensed physical therapist with advanced certification in animal physical rehabilitation, I better put my glasses on, with such certification to be defined by the Veterinary Medical Board and Physical Therapy Board working cooperatively, may provide animal physical rehabilitation under direct supervision by the veterinarian who has established a veterinarian client-patient relationship on a veterinary licensed veterinary premise.
Period.
That is current law. That can happen now.
Good, well, at least we've defined it as we had with the previous 6 or 7 that we really nailed down.
I move to move number 8 with a period after veterinary premise.
I thought I was moving it.
Yes.
So, okay, so.
No,
can
I
you
had already
restate it?
moved
Oh, I
something.
seconded it then.
Okay. So
Can
we
you
have
restate
we
that?
have a bit of an unusual situation. Ms. Mancuso said she wanted to amend it and then didn't really come with some language. So my presumption is
I'm
Ms.
amending it.
Dr. Nolan filled that gap with your language.
Right.
Yeah, we could switch it if you'd like.
Okay, no, that's fine. So that'll be sort of an implicit second, okay, if you will. Ms.
And she's offering the amendment.
She's second, so I'm both in agreement. So, Anne Marie, do you have the motion?
I do.
Okay, so let's hear it again, just going forward.
Okay, you want me to read it one more time? California licensed physical therapist with advanced certification in animal physical rehabilitation, with such certification to be defined by the Veterinary Medical Board and Physical Therapy Board working cooperatively, may provide animal physical rehabilitation under the direct supervision by the veterinarian who has established a veterinarian client-patient relationship on a licensed veterinary premise.
Can I make a comment? This actually provides more restriction than, say, an RVT. So you're asking for direct supervision only, not direct or indirect on the premises even.
That's right.
So you're saying that even someone with this advanced level of training has to have a veterinarian in the room at the veterinary practice?
That's where I would start.
Not in the room. That's not the definition.
Yeah, direct means on premise. But that's where I would start, Lee.
Yeah, we've got to start, we got to get something.
So then we'll
Or
consider
a
that.
range setting, was that how it ended? What? Or a range setting?
No, she didn't.
Or a range
Veterinary
setting.
premises.
I didn't add a range
No,
setting.
I meant.
Should we add a range setting?
Or, oh, yes, okay.
On a range setting.
Or an arranged.
On a range setting, okay.
Okay, so
Hey, wait,
Kathy's
wait,
got a
wait.
question.
hang on.
Before we open up for questions,
The attorneys are uncomfortable. here.
right, go ahead.
I just,
It's worth a shot.
Break time.
yeah, so essentially what we've done is we've added back in a range setting. So are both Ms.
Range setting
Mancuso
is here.
and Dr. Nolan,
still here.
is my understanding you want to add a range setting back in?
Yes, please.
You're both okay with that?
It says
Yes.
on
And
a
with-
licensed veterinary premise or a range setting.
But you would also have to add in or indirect supervision on a range setting, because you've now specified direct supervision in this motion. Before it said degree of supervision to be determined by a veterinarian. So I think if you're adding in or a range setting, that's direct supervision is still applying to both of those settings. So I think you also, if your intent is indirect supervision in a range setting, I think you need to specify that.
But I don't think that's their intent.
I think that's
saying is an RVT can go up to a range and do it, but a PT can't go up to a range and do it.
I'll ask her, is that what you're intending?
I think that I am intending that a licensed physical therapist with additional education could go on a range setting and be unsupervised.
Right.
And I'm comfortable with that too.
Right.
So obviously, I didn't say that clearly, but
By unsupervised, you mean indirect?
Indirect.
Yeah, see.
And I can read
Not
it all
directly
over and do it
supervised,
again
yeah.
if we need to.
not directly supervised.
So if I can be so bold, then to read the motion as I
I'll do
understand
it.
I'll be
I'll
bold
do it.
because I got the fix.
I'll do it because I made the motion. Does Kathy go first before I do it?
Yeah, I think what would, before the direct, indirect, and specifying RVTs and range settings and stuff, it seems to me what you're really saying is animal rehab, under the degree of supervision determined by the vet who has established the VCPR on a veterinary premises, period, or range setting, and just leaving out animal physical rehab. An off-site, isn't that? Because
Well,
the
so then
premises
the
is.
veterinarian could leave the premise and still have physical therapy, physical rehabilitation going on.
And you
I'm
think
not
they should?
comfortable with that.
Oh, you aren't? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that.
So members, yeah, members, as I understand it, just trying to perhaps get grounded in the situation, what this really does, as far as the task force recommendation, is it removes the indirect site, the site that is not licensed as a veterinary premises. Remember, there's a talk in this about the animal physical rehabilitation premises. This motion would essentially eliminate that, so it would either be on a veterinary premises that holds the necessary authorization, or the indirect supervision at the range setting.
Yeah, can I read it, please?
Certainly.
Okay, I'd like to restate, Dick has his hand up, I'm sorry.
I think it's important that we clarify, and maybe with an extra word or two, In talking with veterinarians who do large animal, or in most cases it's equine physical, animal physical rehab, they're a different group of patients. They're usually animals that have athletic injuries. They're not the high-risk patients that I visited in small animal rehab facility. So I think we may need to make sure that range setting means large animal range setting and not just a range setting where somebody could go to a kennel and do physical therapy.
Okay, I'm ready. Here it is. California license, I'd like to make a motion to move number 8, amended to California licensed physical therapist with advanced certification in physical rehabilitation with such certification to be defined by the Veterinary Medical Board and Physical Therapy Board working cooperatively may provide animal physical rehabilitation under the degree of supervision to be determined.
No. Direct. She said direct.
Under the degree of supervision to be determined.
Judy?
Direct supervision.
Judy, there's two different things being proposed here. So Jamie's saying only direct supervision, which means a veterinarian on the premises. You're saying the degree of supervision that the veterinarian would have the ability to determine whether direct or indirect. So your first mover and your seconder have to be in agreement about what you're proposing. And at 10 after 5, if you can't figure it out today, maybe it's not the time to do it.
Would you like me to try? Yeah. Well, under supervised direct supervision by the veterinarian who has established a veterinarian client-patient relationship on a licensed vet premise or a large animal range setting. Or indirect supervision on a large animal range setting. And I think that's a great first step. I think it's something. It's good. That's it.
Okay, so, given
I
that-
second the motion.
Okay, so, we have a motion, as the amendments have been accepted by the mover and the seconder. Okay, so now, is there any other board discussion?
Dr. Nunez.
So, I mean, what this is saying that we recognize that they're physical therapists. We are saying that they're going to have to get additional training and education by these terms that we are going to have oversight for. But we're still not going to trust you to do physical therapy because of that possibility that they're not going to be able to recognize something that is going to go bad. And you can say that there's no way that you can, the argument is there's no way that you can train the physical therapist to recognize those things that are going to go bad. The only way that you can recognize that is to go through a 4-year veterinary program. And therefore that implies that the veterinarian is going to be able to foresee something that's going to go bad. And that's not always the case.
Or the veterinarian's right there. You can
And
see it immediately and work on it immediately.
At least respond immediately.
I understand the desire to try to prevent that unfortunate event, but I think we need to recognize that we can't foresee everything that is going to ever go wrong in the world.
No, we can't, but we can try and do what we can. It's our responsibility to be there for the animals, to do the right thing.
In trying to do that, I think that we might be doing some disservice by just being overly protective.
And I think after we have the credentialing in place, maybe we go there.
Dr.
We,
Klingborg.
we did hear significant testimony that the physical therapists were adamant that there should be additional certification before they did this. I mean, I think anybody who watched the webcast or participated.
But not with the then requirement that it be under direct supervision on a veterinary premises. You're conflating two things that were represented as being separate. The physical therapists were arguing that with advanced certification and training overseen by the Veterinary Medical Board, they should be allowed to operate with indirect supervision.
And I think without even the credentialing, what's the word I want, in existence, How can we give them that when we don't even have the training to provide them at this point in time? I think that if we get this passed, right, let's work on it, these folks get credentialed, things are going great the way they are, then we can loosen it up and say, okay, now there is this kind of premise that we could all feel safe and comfortable about, and they can do their work. But there's not even credentialing, and that scares me the most.
There is credentialing, Judy.
Well,
There are at least 3 programs.
okay, 3 programs.
Are there any public comments on this?
Right here.
I have two. Sorry, Paul Yan Cho from UC Davis. I'd just like to. What was I gonna say? I would like to say a different side of view as far as this proposal that's different from Dr. Nunes, because it sounds like we as a board passing these, from what your standpoint is, that we don't trust in physical therapists that have this undetermined certification. But I'm looking at it on the other way around. This is a practice of veterinary medicine. So as a board, we would need to have direct supervision under the supervision of veterinarians. Unless we create a new profession that's other than veterinarian that could ultimately be responsible for it. For example, I don't know, a 3-year animal degree taken by a physical therapist, and they can become directly supervised, or they can be without direct supervision. I think it's very unsafe for us to move to that step, you know, and especially there's no a good national credential agency for such matter. Therefore, I'm fully support with this motion.
Elaine Moon Carvta. I think the point that we're all missing here is even though the PTs do a wonderful job, and even if they are trained to recognize an emergency in an animal who may have a crisis, they are not licensed or trained to react to or provide treatment for any type of emergency they may encounter without help in the field. Only an RVT or veterinarian may provide such emergency treatments in the field. These people are not licensed or trained to do that.
Thank you.
Janet Van Dyke, after flying tens of thousands of miles and dedicating quite a few days of my life to this process, I'm fairly disappointed to have all of our work reversed in this final few hours. And it seems this has been the pattern of our task force as well, to try to rush decisions into the last hour when people are clearly past that ability. Dr. Waterhouse, to your point about the wonderful physical therapist who elected to go to veterinary school, I would really love to see a lot of the veterinarians in California who think they can offer animal rehabilitation ponder the notion of going to PT school to understand what it is they're offering, because they don't. So one of the things I also am concerned about with your demand for now direct supervision is that you take away from the veterinarian the opportunity to make that decision for themselves. They are now painted into the corner of having to have the person that they'd like to send their case to have to be in some direct supervision situation. And there's a lot of veterinarians in California who are working with people in a different situation right now who would be disappointed and who would lose that ability. And I think that's inappropriate for this board to take that away from your practicing veterinarians. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Sital, I just wanted to remind the board that there are accredited credentialing for APR for registered veterinary technicians and other credentialed veterinary technicians. Again, there is nothing for PTs at this point that is accredited. There are the 2.5, I'll call it 2.5 certification programs for PTs. But the other interesting thing is, I thought I recently saw a media release of the 1,000th credentialed rehab person from CRI who actually isn't even an RVT or a PT. So I think that's another interesting slippery slope, and maybe Van Dyke can clarify. Thank you.
Thank you for that invitation, I'd be happy to clarify. It comes from a state that doesn't require RVTs.
Okay.
All right? And to your point earlier about my course being primarily online, let me clarify that. It's 204 hours of contact time plus about 24 hours of online time. So this is not something that's done online, remotely, or with some sort of abbreviated period of exposure. The PTs, the veterinarians, and the veterinary technicians all spend a great deal of time in hands-on training in our program.
Did you mean to say that it's a state that doesn't have registered vet technicians, not one
Right.
that's required?
There's several states in the country
That
that
don't
do not
have
have LVT, CVT, or RVT.
You said it doesn't require, that was a little confusing.
I'm sorry.
That not
Yeah.
all states have RVTs.
Exactly. Thanks.
Grant Miller, CVMA. Just a technical question for Ms. Mancuso's amended version. So in the final version, you had specified that in a range setting, it would be indirect supervision. My concern about that is that by stating only indirect, you are now taking away the veterinarian's ability to decide whether or not they want direct or
That's a
indirect
problem.
in the field.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, very good, thank you.
Okay.
But the vet can always determine that indirect supervision is not appropriate, just has the option of allowing it.
That's not what it says, though.
Well, then
He's
we
right.
That's what it should say.
Yes.
I'd like to thank Dr. Van Dyke for the clarification. On a consumer piece, when it comes to the safety of that pet, if this unregistered veterinary assistant were to come to California with that credential that he got at CRI or Tennessee or any of these other programs, would the consumer know that they are not licensed in the state and should not be practicing even with this extra credential of animal APR?
Well, speaking as the attorney for the board, I think our clarifications have been clarified. And I would respectfully suggest, rather than invoke some incomplete hypotheticals, it would, I think, serve this board better if commentary was directed at the board's motion itself and any amendments thereto. So I think Dr. Miller had a question or a suggestion about potentially revising the indirect supervision requirement. So is there any desire on the motion, on the maker of the motion, the second, to resolve that issue?
Yes, please.
Okay. And so which direction?
Well, it
I
needs to
can't-
be
I
up,
can't- I'm not a big board
obviously,
member, I-
yeah. It's up to the vet, whether it's indirect or direct, but they have that option for the range setting, absolutely.
Okay, so Anne Marie will restate the motion.
Thank
As
you.
amended.
As amended and amended.
I need to make sure our second is okay with that amendment. Okay. California licensed physical therapist with advanced certification in animal physical rehabilitation, with such certification to be defined by the Veterinary Medical Board and the Physical Therapy Board working cooperatively, may provide animal physical rehabilitation under direct supervision by the veterinarian who has established a veterinary client-patient relationship on a veterinary premises or for a large animal, the appropriate supervision, the appropriate degree of supervision shall be determined by a veterinarian in a range setting.
We left out the word licensed. I guess that licensed veterinary premise, you're just assuming it is licensed.
Well, if it's a veterinary premise, it has to be, but yeah, just clarify licensed.
I would think that the large animal setting would need to be the veterinarian that established the VCPR also.
Yeah, I think that
That's a
qualifies
solid-
it. Because
Okay.
you can't do rehab unless it's under the direct supervision to
Okay.
establish a VCPR. And the qualifier at the end is the veterinary premises as it currently exists, or for large animal, an appropriate degree of supervision to be determined by the veterinarian. And you can add who established the VCPR in a range setting.
Both of.
Yes,
Yes,
they did.
yeah, sounds
You're
great,
good.
thank
Okay.
you very much.
Yes, I approve.
Okay, Call for a vote?
No, as
No
amended,
comment?
because we
Okay, so
amended
we
it,
have
just
to-
go back out
Public comment?
on the motion as amended.
I'd like just to make one final comment, that the requirements being imposed on a licensed physical therapist with additional certification are going to be more restrictive than on a veterinary assistant hired off the street.
But they will be the same as if a physician or a physician or a dentist or a chiropractor wants to work on an animal, needs to work on an animal, those are also under direct supervision. So the physical therapist would
But they
be
don't have the
in
advanced
same-
certification.
But it's still unlicensed activity, right? Until they
as long
have, they're credentialed and we have some kind of permit for them.
Yeah.
So it's better than what it is today.
Which we would have had if we'd gone with the task force recommendation.
I think I
Okay.
voted for
Call
that.
for a vote? Are we ready? Okay, call for a vote.
Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
No.
Dr. Nolan?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler?
I'm more comfortable with this wording than the other, but I'm still, I don't know how this is going to move the ball forward, but I'll say yes to this new wording.
Okay. Lee Heller?
No.
Judy Mancuso?
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries. 6-2.
What's the next step?
Jump off the cliff.
So this will be communicated to the legislature,
Harry,
both the
Harry.
actual recommendations, this stuff's important, Judy.
sorry.
The recommendations of the Animal Physical Rehabilitation Task Force, as well as what the Veterinary Medical Board voted on today. In terms of construction and how to move this forward, what I would advise this board to do is to take those recommendations that have been voted on by the Veterinary Medical Board and delegate to council and staff to determine the appropriate implementation, whether that be by statute or by regulation, given the current authority, to bring back that proposal to the board as a mechanism to now implement these votes.
Can I ask a question? Have there been other circumstances or examples in California of two boards coming together to develop regulation? And if so, how does that happen?
This isn't unique. It doesn't happen all the time. We're currently dealing with a similar structure for drug compounding, where in the legislative digest, the legislature specifically asked the Veterinary Medical Board to develop regulations on drug compounding.
Quite common, Dr. Nolan, being both counsel for physical therapy, not physical, well, it was formerly physical therapy, but physician assistant and medical board, they had a symbiotic relationship where the medical board would sort of be involved in development of physician assistant regulations. So I don't want to say it's that common, but it does occur somewhat frequently.
So we have a motion and a second.
Yeah,
Was
I don't
was
think
there
we
a
had a.
second?
I
thought there
did.
was- Yeah, I
Okay.
thought you
Who-
did.
Repeat the motion.
The motion, excuse me, Dr. Sullivan motioned and Mancuso seconded the
Yes,
motion
that's right.
to delegate to council and staff to take the recommendations that have been voted on by the Veterinary Medical Board and provide some direction to the board on the appropriate vehicles to implement those motions, whether they be by statute or by regulation. And I'm assuming, just looking at them, it's a combination thereof.
And then bring that back to the board for its consideration in its
Right.
next meeting.
Right.
Something to do.
So a motion and a second. Any questions, any discussion on that part? Any public comment on that?
I do want
Call for the vote?
to remind the board, when we call for this vote, you don't have to agree with the motions to vote for staff and council to look at mechanisms. I want you to keep those things separate, because it may very well be by the time council staff brings this back, we have an explanation for why things should happen the way they should happen under the licensing scheme. So I just want to throw that out there, that just if you vote for staff and council to look at this in terms of implementation, that you do not have to agree with the previous motion of the Veterinary Medical Board to vote for staff and council to provide direction.
Ms. Delman, I think all this is sort of an administrative function directing staff
Right.
to produce a product for consideration and export. It does not go to the merits of what was decided, just the sort of the implementation mechanism.
Mr. Nolan.
Is it also possible that once staff and legal review things, that they may suggest modifications to the original concept?
We can
Because
certainly do
of
that.
because of
If
the
you like.
practicality of actually,
We can certainly do that. We can certainly offer comments that
So
the
we're not
board,
locked
that
into
the
that.
board may want to consider as, with this, that perhaps this element is missing or whatever.
or two.
Dr. Nunez?
I would have to say that this board is what determines the direction. We determine the direction of the board, so I would not want a council's opinion on what we should do.
Oh, actually, I wasn't saying an additional opinion, it was just more of a potential refinement, or not say, the language says this, but in practicality, it might not be as achievable because of this, that, and the other thing that we're not thinking of right now.
Dr. Nolan,
So I
did
just
you
want
have?
to keep it to our-
I know we've pushed back telemedicine and different things, and is there a way we can ask that this motion be carried out at the next meeting so we don't
Sure.
lose momentum? I would
Absolutely.
like that to happen.
I do want to clarify one thing that staff and council do when we look at this outside of this, we've taken in a lot of comments today, is sometimes we don't recognize that there's conflicts in the language. And I potentially see conflicts in the language already. And to ferret it out here today would not be advantageous for any one of us. But at least council and I, working together, we can present those conflicts so that we can resolve those in an open forum. So that's the work that we would do with council, is if there's conflicts in how these things kind of fit together in a puzzle, you would want to know that. But we're not in a forum where we can actually do that deep dive.
Call for a vote?
Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
No.
Dr. Nolan?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler?
Yes.
Lee Heller?
No.
And Judy Mancuso?
Yes.
Okay, 6-2. Thank you. All right, we'll take a few minutes. We have to get through legislation.
Okay, unfortunately, we do need to finish agenda number 9, except some of us really, really need a bathroom break. So how about you start, reconvene at 10 till. Okay. We're going to reconvene again, and we're going to agenda number 9, the legislative report. Anne Marie is going to talk about 4 bills here. The first 2 we need to vote on. The second 2 are mainly just, or watch, and it's mainly just for information only. So Anne Marie.
Okay, so in your packets, you have language. We also distributed amendments to SB 546 yesterday. It was recently amended yesterday, but we're going to start with SB 673. This was the pet lovers license plate bill. And really what this bill does is it transfers the sponsorship of this program from the Veterinary Medical Board to the California Department of Food and Ag. There are additional amendments being considered that actually names the nonprofit as a partnership with the California Department of Food and Ag. But today what you have before you is the amendment that would transfer the program out from underneath the Veterinary Medical Board and into CDFA. And the reason why the board was supportive of this is because CDFA already has the infrastructure to do specialized license plate programs. And so it's not a burden on the staff, and it wouldn't, the administrative fees would not nearly be as steep as if the Veterinary Medical Board tried to do this with an existing staff. So the board has supported this concept in the past, and I just open it up for comments, questions.
So, Ms. Delman, are you recommending a support position?
I am. I recommend a support position on this bill.
Second.
Well,
No,
we need a motion first.
You need a first.
Is you make a motion, Judy?
Yeah, Judy, don't.
Oh, that's right, Judy can't.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Anybody else?
I motion that we support, the board position be a support on SB 673.
Second.
Discussion? Any comments from the public? Okay, call for the vote?
Okay. All right, Dr. Waterhouse.
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Dr. Nunez. Dr. Nolan.
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo.
Yes.
Kathy Bowler.
Yes.
Lee Heller, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Judy Mancuso.
I abstain.
Thank you. 2 abstentions, and the vote carries.
Okay, SB 456,
Okay.
which we were given yesterday, or the newest version of. And Emery will discuss this.
Okay, so originally SB 546 was the drug information provisions requiring veterinarians to provide a certain level of information to a client about drugs that are prescribed or administered to their animal pet. The new version of the bill also expands the bill to incorporate some of the provisions that we have asked for of the legislature, and I will be very brief. The Veterinary Medical Board is required, so currently it suggests that we inspect 20% of veterinary premises, but it does not mandate that we do. We've requested fiscal endorsement, if you will, or a budget change proposal to in fact fund our hospital inspection program because it is underfunded. And we have been denied additional resources because the Department of Finance does not see this as a mandate. It sees it as a suggestion. We requested that the legislature help us get funding and mandate 20% of the hospitals are inspected on an annual basis. We also requested that we are required to inspect a veterinary premises on an annual basis and inspect all new veterinary premises within 1 year of being issued a premises permit. This was in the board's strategic plan when we adopted it in 2015. So that change was amended into this bill.
And so when and if they pass this, does that mean that we will get the budget?
That
And
means
what
that
happens
at
if we
least,
don't get the budget? Then
Right.
we're really stuck.
right, well, that means that we at least have the leverage, if you will, that the legislature has mandated the board to do this as part of their mission. They are required to inspect 20% of the hospital, registered hospitals, and are also required to inspect a new veterinary premises within 1 year. So it does help us in terms of secure funding because now it's a legislative mandate, not a suggestion.
I'll move to support.
Any other questions on that? Okay. The second provision is the provision that we requested, working with UC Davis, and we did have input from Western, although I don't think they necessarily supported the entire concept that we put forward to the legislature, but it does allow students within an AVMA accredited program and those within a recognized program to obtain the necessary experience, including experience in surgery under the immediate supervision of a licensed veterinarian. It would also require that the school have a memorandum of understanding, including what that educational outcome should look like and an assessment for evaluating the education. So that was another provision that was added to this bill. The last omnibus change, if you will, change requested by us, the Veterinary Medical Board, was the petition language. Most of you will remember that you voted to stagger the terms where an individual can come back before the board and petition for reduction of penalty or reinstatement. The staggered petition language is now in SB 546. So those are the 3 provisions we requested. In addition to that, it still does include information on veterinary drug counseling or veterinary drug information, albeit the language has changed substantially from its original version. And before I close and we open this up to questions from board members, I do want to notify the board that I do not believe that this bill is in its final form. It will be going through other iterations and amendments. I know that the committee office is still continuing to work with those that are stakeholders in this matter. So I also want to remind the board that within the Board Administrative Procedures Manual, the board has given the executive committee, that being the board president and the board vice president, the authority to deal with bill amendments when there's a time constraint. And to the extent that we need to weigh in on SB 546 as it continues to be amended, I would request the board keep in mind that your executive committee could actually review the bill amendments and vote on the message, or further vote on the message of the board. The board's vote. Okay.
So
Kathy.
just to clarify the last statement, so, because I'm always hesitant when a bill is moving through the
Yeah.
process, because they can change dramatically. If amendments get added over, board objections, whatever, can the executive committee actually change the position from if we support this? Because obviously there's a lot in here we support. I haven't read some of these new amendments. Or is that appropriate, or do we have to have a special meeting, or?
So long as the, what the board agrees to today conceptually in the bill is consistent, the executive committee can carry that vote forward for the board.
So things are added
If
in.
something changes substantially, that would change the board's position, the entire board's position, the most appropriate thing to do would be call an emergency meeting. And there's provisions for an emergency meeting to address legislation that doesn't have to have the 10-day notice and what have you.
Ms. Bullard, we'd be down into the 48-hour realm to call a special meeting on proposed legislation. I do want to echo what the executive officer said, is generally the methodology works something like this. The board would take a position and then they ask that that position be transmitted to the legislature. And in the event the bill came up and was scheduled quickly, even without 48 hours notice, that the executive committee be authorized to communicate that position to the necessary legislative committee. That kind of a mechanism.
Got it.
Dr. Sullivan.
Yeah, I know it's our bill, or a good part of it is, but I do have really concerns over approving something that in its form right now I'm not comfortable with. So I'm not sure what our choices are here.
What, yeah, we have our choices?
Sure, today's menu on bill positions includes their traditional support, which is fairly explanatory, oppose, and then we get down to sort of the dependent variables, which would be support if amended, oppose unless amended, opposed, unless amended, like I just said. So this would be the board could say something like, we support or oppose, this position, and the amendments that we would request would be X or Y or Z or whatever. So seeing how there may be some parts of this bill that are beneficial to the board, since obviously we sponsor them, but there may be some parts that may not be. You could use one of those nuances and address it that way.
Wait, before you ask something else, let me say something. A support with amendments can be the same as an oppose.
I know.
Okay.
Isn't there a watch?
There's a watch,
It is watch.
but a watch position really doesn't give you the leverage to seek amendments.
I move that we support if amended.
Yeah.
So if we go, pardon me, Dr. Sullivan, if we go SIA, we have to know what the A is.
No.
Can I ask another question,
do?
please?
Judy, yes.
When we support a bill, does Anne Marie send a letter of support to the committee that it's in and to the author's office? Is that your level of support? And does anyone show up at a hearing and say, we're here to support the bill, DCA lobbyist or anything by any chance, or no, just a letter?
Depends. Sometimes we need to testify, and we'll usually be asked to testify if they want to hear from the board directly. For matters that tend to be more controversial, it's important, if you've got a position out there, that you need to explain the position, that I would show up and support or
So
oppose.
what is Dick's problem with the bill? I mean, should we talk about that, or do we just, can we discuss that? Because it seems great. I'm ready to like support, and I'm excited about it, so.
Yeah, no second yet.
So again, just a parliamentary procedure, if we, one of the nuances of SIA or OUA or even NIA, neutral if amended, is that you have to sort of conceptualize what you want those amendments to be. So if it was OUA or SIA or NIA, you would say, the medical board, or this board, or that board, of veterinary bureaus has adopted an OUA position with our amendments, that we request to be deleted or added or whatever, but you have, what's that? Opposed unless amended. You know, but if you use one of those nuances about the A, we have to know what the A is.
To answer your question, I don't have my notes with me. Dr. Pollard and I worked on some, on the MDC, on some language.
For-
Pardon?
Explain to her for which, we're talking for which.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, and what is the title? Drug counseling.
Yeah.
For example, in human medicine, they're exempt from having to give information out a second time on when a medication's getting refilled, and that's not in here. So it's technical things like that we'd like to address.
Then that's not a reason not to support, though.
There's others, that's one example. I have my notes someplace else. I didn't know we were going to have to state the amendments.
Is it something that you think that you can support it and we can work with them to make it happen?
That's what I said, supportive amendment.
Well, but that's, supported amendment is gonna be an opposed to the committee.
No, it's
I just
not.
went through this with one of my bills.
I know, and I've been following bills for 20 years, so a negative approach is opposed unless amended. A positive approach is supportive amended.
Well, somebody just took that position, they got a phone call and said this isn't opposed to us, and that was BMP, Assembly BMP. So I'll tell you that committees look at it differently. So we should not come out opposed to this by any stretch. If a support with amendments means that, I don't think we should do it.
Dr. Nunez.
Can I move to SIA?
I
think Dick already
Do you have to?
Oh, Dick already did?
Yes, yes.
But who's saying the A?
Yeah, we just
And
need
you have to
know.
say the A.
You guys are.
And
Well, he said
delineate
that
the A.
A's are in his notes.
Okay, but we need to know what they are for the rest of the board to vote on it. I can ask Kurt, is there a possibility that we could carry this matter over until tomorrow morning so that we can articulate those amendments if there's no objection from the people in the audience?
Certainly, I think the fine print on our agenda notice suggests that we may have to reallocate time and take things out of order, so we can certainly do that. If that's the wish of the board, I would suggest, though, that as we wind down, if the session's drawing to a close, that we at least take public comment
Right,
on items not on the
absolutely.
agenda.
But can we take public comment today?
Yeah, we have to take.
Yeah, on this subject.
Well, the only thing is, I'm not quite, respectfully, I'm not quite sure what we would take public comment on.
Well, perhaps.
Because Solomon's sitting over there.
Well,
You can take public comment, but what I'm saying is, so it could be support if amended, or one of those nuances, and what would,
Well, I think public comment would help inform the board.
Okay.
So I think the
Yes.
public comment's important in terms of getting a
Okay,
full
so-
breadth
so-
of, yeah.
okay, so the motion and second of SIA with the player to be named later, so to speak. So without any, if there's no more, temporarily, no more board discussion, we could go to public comment on the conceptual idea of SIA with the A to be determined tomorrow.
Yeah.
Everybody okay with that? Okay. Any public comment? No?
I know Nancy.
Okay.
I would like to recommend an amendment.
No, there we go.
Somebody had the A. She has the A.
Something.
Okay, where are we? Well, on the last page, there's too many numbers here. Way down at the bottom, H. It says, this section shall not apply to drugs or medicine administered to animal patients in conjunction with surgery or during an anesthetic procedure or emergency services. And it's not clear to me if the intent of this consultation is to require a veterinarian to consult all medications administered to a hospitalized patient, because it talks about outpatient services, but it doesn't talk about inpatient services other than surgery or anesthetic procedure. I mean, many animals are hospitalized because of medical conditions that are not anesthetized or receiving surgery. And it's inconceivable to me that a veterinarian would have to call and consult with the client every time they choose to medicate the animal while it's in the hospital. That would greatly increase the time involved in treating a patient. It would greatly increase the cost to the client. And I don't know that it would be particularly beneficial. So I would suggest that they add the word, instead of administered to animal patients in conjunction, just to, while receiving inpatient services.
That's the intent, yeah. Can I speak to that?
Yes.
Okay, so the intent of this bill is in fact to do exactly what that says. And there were examples in our discussions with the committee staff about when veterinarians are in the middle of treating an animal and they do stop and call the animal owner to say, we've now examined the animal and this is the treatment we're going to provide. And in providing that treatment, we are going to be anesthetizing your animal, or we're going to be providing this pain medication. And that is an expectation within this bill.
I wasn't referring to things like that. I was referring to things like they're going to give them a penicillin injection as part of their, the expectation then would be that the veterinarian has to call the client every time they decide to make a treatment. Then I would recommend that you oppose this bill.
What would happen if they couldn't contact the owner? Can you go ahead and give, is there
So-
wording that allows you to do that? I don't see it.
So they just have to make an effort to do that. If you can't, you can't, but you have made an effort to inform the client of the medications that are being dispensed.
It doesn't really say that,
But is
though.
it dispensed or is it administered? That's what
This
they're
is
getting at.
administered.
This
Yeah.
is administered.
Yeah, and you would be
Can I
required.
ask a question, because you had the conversations with committee staff? Was this, because I'm kind of listening to this too, and I'm thinking there's a lot of situations where you might switch out the antibiotic or pain meds and things like that.
Or the dog starts vomiting.
But you're not giving medication to a non-vet to take home and apply or medicate afterwards. This would require any kind of change, except if it's surgery or emergency, and I guess defined emergency somehow.
Right.
To require that, even like an antibiotic switch.
Correct.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, I think the triggering, if, page 4 out of 6, section 4920, I think is a triggering event. So it'd be in a quote, in addition to complying with the labeling requirements in section 4076, that's pharmacy law, pursuant to section 4077, also pharmacy, in non-emergency situations and outpatient settings, quote, each time a veterinarian prescribes, administers, dispenses, or furnishes a dangerous drug, so that seems to me the triggering, that's the triggering condition, except for, and then we do have the exclusions. This section shall not apply to drugs, medicine administered to animal patients in conjunction with surgery or during anesthetic or emergency services. So if it falls outside of those, then I think the consultation is required.
So that would not require consultation for inpatient. This specifically says non-emergency and outpatient settings.
Well, but there are non-emergency situations in a hospital setting. Like changing antibiotics would be a non-emergency situation. So it doesn't really exclude hospitalized patients.
I was making a comment based on what Nancy had said about inpatient.
So it doesn't exclude inpatient.
So But I think that's the intent, isn't it, is to talk about, medications that are dispensed or given in an outpatient setting, not for inpatient treatment.
But it doesn't, it specifically says in non-emergency situations and outpatient settings.
So could we have that as one of our amendments to clarify that, to say?
Well, it currently does say that, so that's why I'm saying that language is there. It's in non-emergency situations and outpatient settings, each time a veterinarian prescribes, administers, dispenses, and furnishes a dangerous drug or prescription, as defined in 4022, to a client and/or his authorized representative, a consultation that includes the following information, and then it goes in and lists what that information shall be.
So you have a patient in the hospital that, as the continuation of care is going on, you determine that you may not be on the right antibiotics and you decide to switch them. You have to call the client and let them know the new antibiotic that's going to be used and all the risk and information associated with that.
I guess that
And
depends on how
give
you
them a
define.
written,
Well, then
and
in-
give them written information?
It doesn't say
In
you have to give them
section-
written information.
That's section A. In section B, it says for injections, consultation shall be provided before the injection is administered to the vet, to the animal patient. That would be in hospital.
And then there's an exception for emergency situations where you don't necessarily have to get consent, but then there might be a little blurry of what is an emergency. I mean, if blood sugar is trending upward and you make a decision to use insulin, it may not be an emergency at that time, but it certainly has the potential to be an emergency sometime in the future. So there may be a little blurriness as far as, it may not be an emergency now, but it's going to be an emergency pretty soon. So when is consent required to make that change or addition?
Well, I mean, I think that's a judgment call. They're never going to be able to define clearly what an emergency is and capture all situations. I think an emergency is that the animal's life could be in danger if you don't do something.
Is it realistic to try to, I don't know, I mean,
All I know is,
dealing with inpatient care is a little bit different than dealing with outpatient care.
Yes.
Because you're examining that pet at least one time a day, potentially several times a day, and constantly making changes to that as the patient gets better or worse.
Are you
All I know is-
deliberating on whether or not this applies to inpatient care? I believe that it does not
That's what my read is.
because of subdivision A.
Because of.
That in and of itself, in non-emergency situations and outpatient settings. So there's an inpatient situation that could be non-emergency, is an inpatient situation, non-emergency. Would an inpatient situation fall under non-emergency?
Yeah.
Because otherwise,
Yeah, it will.
But I think we
That's what it's
it's
going
only
to say.
outpatient.
most inpatient.
Unless you determine everything is an
If you have
emergency.
12 or
If you're
15 animals in the
inpatient.
hospital, you're administering 4 drugs to each one
I
on
have a
average, and then you have to
question.
change the nutrition.
Yes, Judy.
Is there, Anne Marie and Dick, you may want to listen, is there anywhere that that the patient can opt out
Yes.
of? Okay, so that is in there.
Well, not the patient, but
I mean, the client, me, the
Waive the-
consumer, that I can opt out, I trust you, you
That
don't
we
have to call me.
document every time you dispense a medication.
No, at the visit, if I go to Southern California Vet Specialty Hospital to see Dr. Zwollen for my cat, who I've been going to for umpteen million years, I'm happy to sign a form that says, Dr. Zwollen doesn't need to ask me anything, she just needs to rock and roll and help my cat, okay? Can I do that? I need to know that I can do that.
Page
I
6.
don't want her calling me about stuff.
Page 6 of 6, subdivision F. Subdivisions A and B shall not apply if the client or his or her authorized representative declines or refuses the consultation or elects to have a prescription filled at a location other than the registered veterinary premises. If a consultation is not provided, the fact shall be recorded in the client's record.
But does she need to sign that for every patient, every time, every drug?
Every visit.
Well,
every
she
visit?
doesn't need to
Or
sign
every instance?
anything. She just needs to say she doesn't want it. The veterinarian would have to document in the record
Put in her
that
records.
client declined.
Every,
At one
every drug,
point?
every time?
Absolutely. Oh, yes, a good question. Is it at one point or at every point when a new?
Right, that's my question. In Judy's case, she's talking about every point
Yeah.
she would decline, but
Perhaps that's
This is kinda open-ended and
amendment
vague.
you'd like to suggest.
yeah, that's kind of vague.
Clarified, yeah.
Back to my original point, I don't think it was really the intent to require, when a patient is hospitalized for a medical condition, for the client to have to be consulted on every time it was medicated, although it appears that this does require that.
Well, the issue, whenever a lawyer constructs a statute, the first thing you try is, quote, to ascertain the intent to effectuate the purpose. To find out the intent, we look to the words themselves, because they're the best indicator of what the legislature meant. So if the legislature put something in there, the presumption is they knew what they were doing. So
What a presumption.
I'm a little reluctant to try and divine the intent of this without referencing the words as the best indicator of intent. So perhaps one of our amendments would be clarification of the scope and breadth of what was intended. Okay? Because, like I said, it seems to me the most concrete exemptions are in H. Drugs or medicine in conjunction with surgery during anesthetic procedure or emergency services. Those are specifically enumerated exceptions to the consultation requirement. And I want to be clear, I'm not seeing a lot of consent in here. What I'm seeing is information disclosure. Because I think consent is kind of a different matter that's sort of wrapped around the whole concept of veterinary care, is because conceivably, the owner can say, well, I don't wish to proceed with this procedure for whatever reason, so. Without requirement.
And so I think it's, we all want to have clients that understand what's going on. We all want to communicate. I mean, I spend God knows how much time, communicating to clients. And the more they understand, the better. But whenever I've been hospitalized, I haven't gotten anything that explains all the drugs that I got. Certainly when I go to the pharmacy, I get information. And I think that, we should be expected to dispense information when we dispense drugs as well. I'm just hesitant to go beyond what's done in human medicine. So, who had their hand up?
I did.
And the other thing I would say is, just because of the way it's worded and assuming or not assuming legislative intent, this also, I think, makes it a crime to fail to. And I assume that the criminal thing, there's got to be more definition for, if you're going to add a criminal penalty, on the failed to consult. Obviously, if you can't get a hold of someone, you can't get a hold of someone, but a vet might be concerned that they shouldn't change the antibiotic because they can't get a hold of the person. And that's what, at the end of the day, the animal would suffer at that point.
That's a good point. You're afraid to do something because you can't get a hold of the owner, and goodness knows that happens.
So I don't know. This is when they're in the vet hospital, yeah.
Lee?
So I'm going to put my lawyer hat on also like Kurt and say, legislation that is not clear benefits nobody, right? I think it's pretty clear that says this section shall not apply to drugs or medicine administered to animal patients in conjunction with surgery or during an anesthetic procedure. I interpret that to mean that it applies to everything else. But if we're not comfortable with that for precisely the reasons you've just articulated, you can't reach the owner, you need to change the medication, then we oppose unless amended. Not because of lack of clarity, but because we disagree with the recommendation being made under the existing legislation.
Dr. Sullivan?
Just for, I guess, my understanding, the way I read it, if the client declines the consultation, I definitely have to note that in the record, because if if I don't note it, it wasn't done.
Right. Yeah.
So, okay, just being sure.
Okay, so where are we?
I think what the board had asked for some leverage or leeway is to take a position of support unless amended and come back with some more articulate amendments tomorrow after
I
digesting.
think you mean oppose unless amended, not support unless amended.
I had support unless amended.
Support if amended.
Oh, okay, so you're happy with it as is?
Support with amendment.
Support if amended. Because we support the
Well,
we're doing it.
Support if amended.
With amendment.
Oh, okay. Is if that different than unless?
That's what, thank you,
Yeah.
Kathy.
Unless,
Well, it means it's not written correctly.
Yeah,
It changes when you say if amended. And
Yes,
then support unless amendment means we like it as it is now, but if you amend it, we're not.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Right.
Wow,
You
it's
wanna
getting
say-
late.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark, for that clarification.
Yikes.
I in there.
That's why it's an aye, not a you.
Okay, I'm back.
Does anybody here know the history of who Lizzie was, and was Lizzie hospitalized?
Yes, in fact.
No, okay, okay.
This is
So it
out.
was not
Just
during,
a simple visit to the
Yeah,
Yeah.
outpatient.
outpatient. I don't know if
Can you come
Yeah, that's
forward and
good. No,
state your
that's
name?
To come out.
Solomon, yeah. It's Solomon, right?
Yeah, Solomon.
Solomon.
Solomon Stoop, the Liz Initiative for Pet Protection. I came identified today with the T-shirt. Thank you for considering this. It was an outpatient, non-emergency, non-urgent visit. That's what it was. It was simple, preventative issue. That's all it was, and that is the spirit of this. You know that I'm very good at making speeches, and I don't want to take more time because I know that everybody's tired. But I offered to Dr. Sullivan to call you tomorrow to remind you to bring your notes. As a consumer, I don't like to hear that a member of the board doesn't bring the notes on something that is going to be discussed. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan.
Can I ask a question about the if?
Yes.
If we define, and I'm not sure if this is even a possible appropriate action, if we say, if amended to add emergency service, or hospitalization, or something like that, to actually open that area up, so it's not a hospital ongoing treatment thing, that's the board's suggestion to the legislature. Obviously, they can take it or leave it, but isn't that what the concern is about here for the, we like the bill mostly, right, everything. It's just a little vaguely and not maybe thought out on number H, or letter H.
Ms.
So
Bowe,
I-
I'm sorry.
Or is that out of order?
So I think, so I think tomorrow we're going to talk about more specifics there, but.
So then we should
So
just
I-
move on right now.
Well,
So do we need?
Well, I'm a little, we seem, perhaps, could we, sir, perhaps in order to not put this over to tomorrow, are there, the two emerging concerns I have are, one, the hospital concern, and number two, what to do if we can't contact the owner? And perhaps, are there more amendments of that nature?
Yes.
Yes, there are.
Yes.
Well, I think we can articulate some of those, though, because I do
Okay.
agree that Mr. Stoop has talked about the spirit of this bill, and he had approached the legislature to request this vehicle, and the spirit was not to include inpatient. I think we need to make sure that the language reflects the spirit, and thank you for your comments today. I think we've talked about a few things here that I hopefully can articulate, because I didn't do a very good job earlier. But one, this is just outpatient settings, and if we can make sure that's clear in the language. Two, that the client does not have to refuse the consultation each and every time they're coming back for the same prescription. That can be clarified. Three, is there anything in here that goes beyond the obligation of human medicine in terms of what you would require a doctor or a pharmacist to do? And if so, why would that be why would we impact the veterinary profession and the consumer in a way that we wouldn't require in human medicine. I would also like to address Kathy's comment. This does not create a new crime. This basically this speaks to Section 5, page 6, very end. If in fact this were to create a new crime and there would be costs associated with that, it talks about the impact, the reimbursement. So it doesn't create a new crime.
About that human part, though, human medicine, I mean, a human could ask questions and an animal can't. So I don't think that one is really relevant. And I think if this was on our agenda, Mr. Solomon, where do you live?
In San Rafael.
So he came today for conclusion on this from San Rafael, and it was on our agenda, and we owe that to him. And so I don't think.
I am willing to come here every day.
No, I know, but this is our responsibility, you know,
Judy,
to you, so.
We got this morning.
Yeah, this is the amended.
So we didn't see this language until 10, and we had a lot of
And
other
we
stuff on
changed
our
it.
table. So my struggle is I haven't had a chance to read it carefully because it showed up when the meeting started, and we had so much other stuff going on all day. I wanted to do this issue justice by having the time to read this 6 pages carefully and make sure that I understand what I'm voting on.
Okay, in all fairness, it didn't get amended until the 17th.
Oh, yeah, no blame attached to staff.
Yeah,
It's
no,
just,
no,
it's just what happened.
Which
Yeah.
is, and
Well, I want
Mr.
Mr. Stoop to understand, the amendments came out while we were at the meeting. So we are doing the best we can to deal with the amendments that were obviously not great in terms of timing. Please.
The amendments came out on Monday around 9 or 10 p.m. Thank you.
So, members, I think there's two things emerging. I think we could, do you think that irrespective after a close read of this bill that you would waiver off the SIA position? Because it seems like what we're trying to do is just figure out and cement what the A's are.
Yes.
Okay? Is that,
So we're still trying to figure out what all the amendments
right, but
might
generally,
be.
generally speaking, the board's proposed course of action would be support if amended with those amendments to be fleshed out.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
Okay. So in respect to Mr. Stoop's travels, is there anything that you wish to say, sir, about our proposed supportive amendment? It seems like what we are talking about is we need a clarification about the scope and breadth, whether this outpaces human medicine, that may or may not be a reason for that, whether it's get the hospital issue resolved, also whether someone could essentially waive all required consultations, upon delivering the animal to the veterinary. You could just say, I don't, for this animal, don't call me, you just do what you think is best. I think those are the three emerging things that we've heard tonight, with some understanding that there may be something to be discovered later. So, sorry, if you could address sort of our conceptual supportive amendment with those three understandings.
I want that the veterinarians feel comfortable with this. I want veterinarians to feel protected. What I am asking is that the same right to protect yourselves, at least that right be given to the consumers, at least. That's all. I am asking for symmetry in the protection, not one-sided. And as far as your point, it is when one goes with a pet to the veterinarian to a consultation in a non-emergency, outpatient, non-urgent, and I agree that if the client wants to say, I don't want you to ever even think about the need to ask me or offer to me information, I think that's perfectly acceptable. Okay. And I am trying to advocate for this in such a way that everything that you are concerned about gets clarified, but that the consumer be informed. I just want to add that when FEMA was authorized to rescue people with their pets in a very expensive operation of rescue in a natural disaster, it would be contradictory that in a relaxed setting at a veterinary clinic, a consumer cannot protect the pet with information that may be on the bookshelf or in the box of the medication. And this is all we're trying to do, to eliminate contradictions. And any doubt that you have, please clarify it. Anything that you feel that may be unfair, please speak about it. But I want you to know that what the legislature has in mind is to protect the consumer, Dr. Sullivan. That's the only thing, to protect the consumers. And I insist on that. Just that, to protect the consumer and to observe the right to be informed and to eliminate contradictions, and that's all. Just share the information, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Solomon.
You know,
Dr. Nunez.
One point that I was just thinking of, it is different when a pet's in a hospital versus when a pet is sent home with medications on an outpatient basis. Because if a veterinarian makes a decision to change the drug while they're in the hospital, if there is an adverse effect because of that change, they're going to be able to recognize it pretty immediately, and they can make the change again. Versus if there's going to be an adverse effect on an outpatient basis, perhaps the consumer is not going to be able to recognize that. So I don't think, you know, when Kurt talks about the intent of the bill and if the language is effectuating that change. Did I say that right?
No.
Damn it. I think the intent was if there's an adverse effect that's going to happen on an outpatient basis, then the consumer needs to be informed about that. I don't think the intention was to apply to inpatient care.
But I don't think it's only if an adverse effect.
Dr. Sullivan.
Yeah, if we're talking about strictly outpatient, that's a huge difference from how I was interpreting the wording, and makes it the ability to do it makes it much easier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
So
Well, because you're in consultation.
Can
with
we
the
be
person,
comfortable
yeah.
with, if we clarify this as outpatient and communicate that to the committee, that it's a support if amended?
Well, I mean, look, I've been to good emergency. This is gonna be the program. Here's why I'm putting the pet on these drugs. Here's how you're gonna administer, blah, blah, blah. They have labels, they abide by all the rules, and you're out with them and it works beautifully. In an emergency setting, you know, I would like to know, this is the plan for your animal, but then once you leave and as things happen and things progress, there's a need to change and do whatever is needed. So, I mean, I'm in agreement with him, you know, that you need to know this stuff. I didn't know that we needed to write new law for it. It's crazy that we do.
Okay, so are you okay with support if amended?
Well, I don't want to take emergency out. It's not that you shouldn't
No one's
disclose all
taking
this stuff
emergency
to.
out.
Emergency's already out.
It's hard, that bill's not written for that.
It's in there.
This bill in non-emergency and
Yes,
outpatient.
yes.
Okay, that's fine then.
Okay.
It's fine as it is.
We just need to clarify, because the injectable part in subdivision B seems a little disjointed. So I think the amendments would be just to clarify the intent, the spirit of the provisions,
Okay,
as
okay,
Mr. Stu
okay.
testified.
Okay. Okay, that's fine.
Oh, wait, did we have a second? We do. We have a motion and a second on that.
Okay,
So
so,
I think we just need to clarify that the motion is second, that the amendments that we, conceptual amendments, we'd be seeking the clarification, and also whether you could essentially have a blanket refusal for.
On the part of the client.
One of the consultation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any comments from the public?
I also wanted some discussion on what is in pharmacy law, that refills don't have to have consultation. I mean, we have clients coming in getting the same medication every 3-4 weeks for months.
Just conceptually, but they already did have consultation in the first place, so wouldn't that qualify as consultation if they had consultation when they came in originally and they're just getting a refill? I know. Okay. Thank you, you're right.
Any other public comment? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. We call for the vote?
Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Dr. Nolan?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler?
Yes.
Lee Heller?
Yes.
Judy Mancuso?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Solomon.
I appreciate very much.
For the purposes of moving through AB 485, the information is in your packet. This is a watch bill, because it doesn't pertain directly to veterinary medicine. Sorry, Judy. Is there any comments, questions?
It's an awesome bill. And it passed the Assembly BMP yesterday, 10-1.
Congratulations, Judy. AB 942, again, just FYI, this would provide tax credit to clients for veterinary services. So just FYI.
I'm sorry, can I go back? You say here, board position recommends support. Yes.
I know, that was an error. Thank you for calling that out. It was supposed to be a watch. That was an error. Thank you, Jamie.
Although I like the support, that would be very
Sorry.
nice.
Judy, someone was trying to get behind you.
Okay, so I'm sorry, 942.
942 is the tax relief bill. Again, just recommended position here is just
Love it.
to watch that.
That's a good one.
I would also, again, just like to, this is all of the bills that we have before you today. I'd like to mention, we are in the heavy legislative, bless you, heavy legislative season right now, so there are many bills that are working their way through the legislative process. There are a couple of bills out there that we will not discuss by name, but would have an impact to the board because they're kind of global bills that would impact many DCA boards if they continue through the process. To the extent that we see those bills gaining momentum and taking shape, we may need to call the emergency meeting to have the board vote on those bills. And that is something that is within the purview of the board under the Open Meetings, Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act. So just keep that in mind. If you receive an email that we need to call an emergency meeting, it's very important. We're going to be weighing in on legislation.
You know,
No, not watches.
if Donald Trump would ever have pets, AB 942 might, I'll make him open up his tax return. But he doesn't have pets.
Thank goodness. They'd probably be taken out. Okay, so can
And
we
if
talk
they're-
about this helping out pet every
I'm
day
recommending
thing?
those, and Dr. Sullivan brought up a good point. In my past, the board didn't have to vote on watch positions, but if they so choose to, they can. Okay, so it's up to you guys. You don't have to vote.
Anybody have an opinion on whether we need to vote on the last two, or we just adopt a watch position?
No,
'Cause
if
they're
a
gonna
watch
change
is,
anyway.
so watch is sort of an administrative function,
Yeah,
your
that's-
staff is just watching it.
Yeah, we've always just always.
Okay, can we move on to agenda item number 10, public comment on items not on the agenda?
Wait, what part is, where does this one fit in? It was right after everything we just did.
That's a public comment that's not on the agenda that was submitted. So we can't discuss it. It's just in your packet for
Okay,
information.
okay.
I would like to request,
Speak up, Nancy.
I would like to request an agenda item be placed on the next meeting agenda to discuss the RVT exam situation. CARPTA had come up with the concept of, you're probably aware that the RVT exams have gotten quite expensive. Now that we're administering 2 exams, it costs $300 to take the California RBT exam, and it's now cost $325 to take the VTNE. And when we switched to using the VTNE, it was the presumption that we were going to be using a mail-out law exam that was going to cost $35. It ended up being a computerized exam that cost $300 that tasked 50 questions on law questions that have become so obscure as to be irrelevant to the practice of RBTs. It has come to our attention that in comparing the VTNE to the California exam that we had originally proposed getting rid of the VTNE altogether, and getting rid of the California exam altogether and just going to the VTNE, but then it came to our attention that we probably need to maintain the California exam because of exclusive RBT job tasks in California. So then our next idea was, why are we administering the VTNE instead of giving a comprehensive California exam like we used to? The advantage of the VTNE is so that a person can work in a state other than California. Well, that's not the job of the Veterinary Medical Board. The job of the Veterinary Medical Board is to license RBTs to work in California. And when we presented this to various other RBT associations and veterinary RBT schools, we got a lot of support for this concept, going back to giving just one exam, the California RBT exam, which would be a comprehensive exam including job tasks and veterinary law. And I understand now that you're going to be eliminating the veterinary law exam, so you'll no longer be having a separate law exam for veterinarians.
That hasn't been decided.
Hasn't been decided, you're considering it. It's the recommendation of the OPES. And you would probably be going back to using just the California board exam, which has several questions on, the justification being that there are already veterinary law exams, questions on the California State Board. Well, there were veterinary law questions on the California State Board for RBTs as well, and that was considered satisfactory until 2014. So anyway, I would like to ask that this item be placed on the agenda for discussion at the next meeting.
Is there an objection?
It's a public comment at this point, and tomorrow we go over future agenda items. We will definitely put that on the table for consideration. And there's several items for the July meeting agenda already. Animal rehab, not the least of which is going to take up some time in July. So to suggest it's on the next board meeting, I think we need to look at what's on our plate and determine whether or not it's going to happen in July or happen in October, but that discussion is tomorrow on the agenda. It's future agenda items.
Can I ask a question? Didn't we do, and I can't remember where it stood, but didn't we do a study of how much the test cost? And so wasn't that kind of recent? Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Any other public comments? Okay, we'll recess until tomorrow at 9 a.m.